A warm and friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Justin Perri, who does an incredible job over at Chalk Value Bets. We're going to talk with him about what we've all seen here to begin the season. A lot of favorites being able to cash. We've seen quite a few games go over the total. We'll get his thoughts as to why that might be, what he's all taking a look at in terms of his Chalk Value data from the first few games of the season. If there's a few teams that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on, and why his real sweet spot when it comes to college basketball in terms of handicapping, that comes a little bit more in about 2 to 3 weeks from now. So we're going to be chatting about that and so much more in the final segment. I'm going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Friday as we hit some bank shots. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by our good friends over at Better. That is BETR on Better. They're making it easier than ever to be able to get into the game. And by being a listener to this podcast, you're able to get $10 free. You just want to go to better.app. That is BETR.app. And then utilize the promo code of VSINPod. That is VSIM Pod. That gives you $10 to be able to play some daily fantasy right away to be able to get in the game. And we do want to be getting in and staying in the game. We're taking a look at everything that we're getting in college basketball. So let's recap everything that we saw on Thursday, try to find some trends, and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
The ranked teams were able to have a very easy time with all of their opponents as every single one of them was able to win by a minimum of 36 points. Now, whether or not you got the cover was based on, in a lot of these cases, when you bet the game. Like, you take a look at that Louisville versus Jackson State game. That opened up at a 29.5. That closes at 39, so yeah, you got barbecued in terms of closing line value there, but Louisville, they do dispatch of Jackson State 106-70. The final in this one, as for Louisville, this was a very solid performance from them down low. They win the rebound battle by a count of 49-29. Keshawn Pryor, who got injured last season, he's back out there on the floor. He was able to give the team 16 minutes off the bench, and your main headline guy was actually Connie Ruths, who he's really been able to look solid here for Louisville to begin the season. 16 points, 10 rebounds. He had Ryan Conwell come in. He was able to go 4 of 10 from 3. 19 points for Louisville. They did a solid job of winning the turnover battle, 12-10 as well. So nice solid start for them. You saw Florida absolutely dispatch North Florida, this by a count of 104-64. And this one was a big giant sweat with regards to so many different aspects of things, as Florida, they open up as 36-point favorites. They closed 43-43.5 point favorites, and that total was 169.5. So Florida, after they lost that game night number 1, they were able to bounce back in a big way, as North Florida, they go 7 of 28 from 3-point range, and Florida goes just 6 of 32 from 3. So not like they were lighting it up there, but Mike Hand logging it off the bench. How about 17 points, 13 rebounds, as Florida wins the rebound battle 64-24. North Florida, 24 rebounds as a whole. Hand logged in, and Alex Condon, a combined 23 rebounds between the two of them. And Alex Condon, he was able to put in their 25 points. So Florida was able to really get things going down low. Iowa State, they have been known to be able to blow out these lesser teams. They get the win. They get the cover 102-62 over Grambling. As for Iowa State, Joshua Jefferson had himself a game, 18, 20 points, 8 rebounds. And for Iowa State, they hold Grambling to just not be able to get anything going on offense. For Grambling, 21 made field goals, 19 turnovers, as you had Blake Buchanan throw in their 4 blocks. And in terms of being able to take away the ball, Taman Lipsky, he does what he does best. He was able to give the team 5 steals, 6 assists, 10 points, not necessarily a just massive score or anything like that, but man, was he able to provide some very rock-solid defense in this one. And then the other ranked team, Auburn, they had a tough time with Merrimack in terms of scoring early on during the game, but they put up 56 in the second half, 95-57. The final for Auburn, they win the turnover battle 11-8, so Merrimack, they were unable to get their style and generate turnovers. Another nice performance from Keshawn Hall, who was able to slide the team with 25 points, 14 rebounds, and for Auburn, they go just 6 of 24 from 3, but Merrimack, they go 8 of 32 from 3. Merrimack shoots 28.5% from the floor, and they get line-based on the glass, 55-24. Auburn is able to win that battle, so you saw the ranked teams all be able to take care of business. And for IU Indy versus Long Island, this was crazy, as you saw that closing total be 185.5. And if you took the closing total, you did get the under in this game, as for IU Indy, they do fall to Long Island by kind of 94-90. And watching these totals are going to be very, very entertaining, to say the least, as for Long Island, they had Jomo Gaines be able to put up a very, very rare double-double. 7 points, 12 rebounds, 11 turnovers, and he had 9 of those turnovers in the first half. Long Island was able to do a better job of protecting the ball in the second half. Isaiah Miranda, he came in off the bench, a true 7-footer, was able to hit a 3, 12 points in 11 minutes. And for IU Indy, they do a nice job winning that turnover battle, 23-14, but they just were unable to knock down their threes. They go 8 of 30 from three-point range. For Long Island, they allowed IU Indy to hang in the game by going 11 of 22 at the free throw line, but that's going to be a very fascinating team, to say the least, to watch, and it's going to be interesting to see how West Virginia does under their new coach in Mr. Hodge, as Russ Hodge's team had a tough time with Campbell. They do get the win, but they do not get the cover. 73-65 final in this one, as for West Virginia, Hunter Huff was able to huff and puff for 23 points, but Campbell was able to hold in there despite going 2 of 14 from three-point range, because they did a solid job on the glass, winning that rebound battle 40-36, with having Chris Fields Jr. off the bench be able to supply the team with 10 points and 15 rebounds. So nice shout out to him. You also saw a bit of a center in terms of one of the games that were not on the betting board. A non-D1 team in Northwoods of Michigan. They take down Western Michigan 85-81. That is not good if you're Western Michigan, to say the least. And Cleveland State out there in the Horizon League, they nearly avoid a upset. They were playing against Capital University 71-70. Cleveland State just barely ekes out a win. You did see Chicago State staying out there in the Midwest, get a cover against St. Louis, 108-86. Robbie Avila, not even necessarily the biggest game for St. Louis. He had in this game 15 points, but just a lot of a spreading of the wealth in this one. You had 7 different guys score at least 9 points for St. Louis, and for our good friends in Chicago State, they do find a way to be able to get the cover thanks to winning the offensive rebound battle, 12 offensive rebounds for them to 7 for St. Louis. So yay verily there, and yay verily if you laid the points with Texas A&M. They completely lambasted Texas Southern, this by a count of 104-70, after Texas Southern actually did a relatively good job towards the early part of the game. They were down 5 points at the half. If you, like me, had the points with Texas Southern, this was a little bit of a brutal second half, as for Texas A&M, Mackenzie Mbakpo was out night number 1, and he was out once again in this game, but they were still able to find a way, as they pretty much played, I think it was 11 different guys for at least 13 minutes, so they're really looking to be able to find their rotations, and I think everyone aside from Jakari Lane that saw at least 15 minutes along Zach Clemens all put in there at least 9 points, so relatively good depth right now for Texas A&M. We'll see how those just sort of rotations go moving forward, and it's going to be interesting to watch this team moving forward, as CCU, they lose that game to New Orleans opening night, but Tanner Toolson, he's able to restore order 104-63. They were able to take down St. Francis of Pennsylvania, so they get a nice win and cover out there. You saw UC Riverside be one of the few teams to be able to get a road win this season, 72-70. They were able to take down North Dakota. We have been noticing, and I'll point this out in the trends here in a few minutes, lots of favorites, and most of those favorites are home teams, and lots of overs this far this season, though Xavier, they have not been able to cover games. They barely squeak one out against Lemoyne, 74-69. Very nice, the final in this one, as for Xavier, they were bailed out by the fact that Malik Mensa Moore was able to supply 17 points, 5 assists, and for Xavier, they shoot 13 of 25 from three-point range to be able to win this game by 5 points. They weren't necessarily stout on the glass. They lose a rebound battle 33-31, and for Lemoyne, they lost a turnover battle. Lemoyne did 18-11, but they did a solid job driving the ball on the side. They were able to shoot over 50% from the floor, with Trent Mascara being able to be very, very scary, being able to supply 22 points in this one. You also saw a very interesting one with Boston College holding down the Citadel 76-47. Looks like it's going to be another brutal year for the Citadel. And for Ohio, after they lost opening night in the Sunbelt MAC Challenge, they bounced back against Illinois State, 72-68 the final. Both of these teams look a little bit improved with regards to their perimeter defense, as they combined 9 of 34 from three-point range from these two teams. But for Ohio, Jackson Pavelski, he was able to come in, he supplied the team with 19 points, and for Ohio, they did a solid job in terms of being able to limit Illinois State and their second and third chances. And for Illinois State, 6 of 11 at the free throw line. Ohio, they very nearly killed themselves at the free throw line, 15 of 27 at the charity stripe, but Ohio, a nice win. They do find a way to get the job done, and after Bethune-Cookman pushed Auburn to overtime. Well, they lose to Miami by a count of 101-61. That's why you don't make too much out of one performance, as you could say that about Robert Morris as well, who they got completely blitzed by Iowa to begin the season. They go on the road in overtime and they knock off Drake 81-79. So a nice money line cash for anyone that had old Bobby Morris, as Robert Morris and Chitakulis, who comes on over from North Carolina A&T. Nice performance down low, 18 points, 10 rebounds. Looks like the Eric Henderson era might not be quite as great as the Ben McCollum era out there at Drake, as Drake lost a rebound battle 46-36, and for the Drake, they go 6 of 23 from 3. So not necessarily the world's greatest performance. So Jalen Quinn, he was able to supply that Drake team with 20 points. And another result of note that we did have on Thursday was North Texas being able to look very rock solid, 80-53. They're able to take down Northwestern State. Pretty much the lone game that is not final as I'm recording this podcast. We actually have a few. Denver versus Washington. Denver trying to hold in there right now, down 50-36. About 15 minutes remaining in the second half. And Arkansas Pine Bluff versus Portland. Right now, Portland up 32-26, getting towards the back half of the first half there. So with like 2 or 3 results pending on the college basketball betting board for Thursday, we'll take a look at the trends that we've gotten here in the first few days of the season, and I was pointing it out. Favorites and overs. The over is sitting at about 53%, 81-72, and that includes a few pushes along the way. I think that we've had like 5, if math serves me correct, but the favorites, they're in at 58.2%, 89-64-2 against the spread, and that correlates with home teams sitting at 57%, 87-66-2 against the spread. So we'll see if that is the case moving forward, and that's what we're currently getting trend-wise in college basketball, and that's what we all saw in college basketball on Thursday. Now let's take a look at what we've all gotten here in the first few days of the season, and how our good friend over at Chalk Quality Bets, Justin Perri, is deciphering it all. He joins me next on Go Seeps with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beats Family Podcast. Are you looking to get an inside edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSIN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. We're back in lovely Las Vegas for Go Seeps with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Justin Perri aboard. He does a tremendous job over at Chalk Quality Bets, taking a look at this great game of basketball, and he does so on so many different fronts. When it comes to not college basketball season, he does a great job taking a look at the WNBA and also the NBA postseason when that's in action. He does an incredible job here in the season looking at all the data that goes into college basketball, not just what we see in terms of box score, but the expected points, the expected efficiency. He does an amazing job of being able to decipher it all, and you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Justin Perri and the number 8. He also does some great work over at Hoops HQ. That is Seth Davis's website, and it's always a pleasure, Justin. Thank you so much.
Greg, always a pleasure to join. Excited for another great season of college basketball.
I am as well, and Justin, as we're doing this, we're through a full few nights of college basketball. Certainly the Tuesday and Wednesday slates did not compare quite to the Monday slate, but in the first few days, and obviously we are two men that we take things in stride, we're not going to overreact to a few days of college basketball, but has there been anything that's really stood out to you in these first few days that you've been picking up on?
You know, I think there's been a good amount of dominant showings in these first couple of days. A lot of teams scheduling some of these big, buy games where they're just given massive lines and do a good job covering them. And we've seen plenty of wins getting close to 40 points. We've seen plenty of teams honestly just continue to go out and dominate early, I think has been one thing I've noticed. And then we're just seeing, I think, some of that tinkering later in these games. It's a little less predictable in the second half. And a lot of times you'll see teams sort of just get mentally defeated, I think, as well as what I'm noticing at certain levels in terms of starting cold and staying cold, especially in terms of what we're seeing with our expected numbers, and then starting hot and getting hot. So I think when you see these behaviors in the beginnings of games, you can sort of trust it a little bit more than maybe sometimes we're used to, but it's of course case by case, but you definitely want to be able to have that expected data to back up a sort of an X's and O's analysis so you can understand maybe a potential reason why one team might be able to do better than what their expected numbers look like. And then when you see it sort of come to fruition in the expected numbers because they're hot, you can trust that it's going to continue.
Absolutely. And there were a few just massive rear end kickings that we saw night number one, like the way that Louisville was able to beat the brakes off of South Carolina State. I recognize that it's South Carolina State, but man, that was impressive. And what do you make out of some of these teams that have really turned it on in the second half as well? Like I go to that Kansas State versus UNC Greensboro game from Tuesday. Kansas State was down at the half and they end up winning that game by 30. Wisconsin, they were only up like 5 points with 8 minutes and change remaining against Campbell. I think that they went on a 27-1 run to end that game as well. And I've been noticing that with a lot of these games where the underdog comes out, they give you like a nice 20, 30-minute effort, and then they fade into the abyss late.
Yeah, that's definitely, one of these potential behaviors, right? I think you're not getting so many, I guess, buckets that you see these games sort of fall into. It's very often going to be the early contest and the late fade. And then there's, the good old fashioned blowout early into the second unit for the winning team, sort of letting the first unit of the losing team cover with the back door. Of course, not at any specific rate that I think just blindly beats the spread. I think there's a lot to sort of look into to understand the way these lower end teams play when stacked up against some of the better squads that are using them as like a tune-up, something to get their confidence going, something with not a lot of pressure. Of course, at the very high end, you definitely want to be looking for those 40-point wins because we know that they sort of stack the weight in terms of the net rating when it comes to tournament and resume time. So the teams that are looking like champions early sometimes are the ones that look like champions late. So you definitely want to see your, potential future ticket beating up on a couple bad teams pretty easily, right? At least at a quality duration in a game. There's obviously a big dichotomy of ways to look at it, or I guess, you can either really take it seriously or you can try to understand which coaches maybe aren't taking it so seriously. So we'll see. It all is unfortunately hard to actually generalize, but you can sort of find trends in there and learn the way that certain types of programs and offenses and defenses do it when they're up against other matchups and then reinforce it with expected data.
I think that is so important to be doing as well. And with regards to some of these teams that you were feeling relatively good about coming into the season and maybe did/did not prove it, were there a few teams that have stood out to you these first few nights that you take a look at things and as of right now, you're feeling good about them? Again, only one game in for pretty much all of these teams, so it's a very small sample size, but are there a few teams that really stand out to you and you think, man, this is a team that right now I'm feeling pretty good about?
Nothing really jumped off the page better than, I think what you get just from trying to absorb it all at once in terms of where the data's been at right now. Greg, it's pretty interesting. I think BYU has looked pretty good. There was a little bit of a touch and go effort there with Villanova, but in terms of how everything came out in the data, I think that they, probably should have won by a little bit more. Neutral court starting things off, I believe. I'm not 100% sure about that, actually. But they definitely were expected to sort of be shooting a lot better there. That game was kind of ugly. I expect them to really start picking it up. I like the way that DeBanso looked. And then, they have a couple other really nice players in there. Robert Wright, Keita doing pretty well in terms of being in the front court. So I liked how they looked. I think that they will probably be someone that we'll be talking about throughout the season when discussing top quality teams. Florida, of course, losing that opener to Arizona, expected to be a 6-point shot quality win. So, in terms of the way that I honestly take a look at this game, we're going to take it as a win. It's unfortunate they lost, but when you play that game back a million times, 10,000 times, which is sort of where we're at, not the million range, you would expect, based on the shot profiles, for Florida to do pretty well. It was throughout the entire game. They were up by 4 at the half. They were expected to be up, and then they just, really couldn't get it done in terms of the win. But it was just a bad finish for them. And I think that we'll see Florida, literally look to defend their championship and sort of turn it on. I'm not super surprised that they had a little bit of a tough time here playing Arizona.
Yeah, and with that Arizona team, I mean, Koa Pete, he looked absolutely incredible on that front. And how much do you want to take a look at some of these teams that they just look very different from a season ago? Because with Florida, they bring back much of that front court, but in terms of the guard play, I think that's going to be really good. But you've got a lot of guys that didn't necessarily play with one another. With Arizona, they've got some early season chemistry, and I think that that's something that is very much worth looking at this year. Because if these two teams play again in, say, February or March, I think that Florida might win that game. But because Arizona had that camaraderie, because they did have more of the returning guards, and I think that that's the key. Because you can always look at returning minutes, what have you, but I think that returning guard play is a little bit more important than returning big men this time of year. I think that that makes a massive difference.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're looking at a Florida squad that really is going to get their legs under them, learn how to play better together. And I think definitely a facet of the new style transfer portal impacted era that we see today, right? Like, your teams are built from the ground up all over the place. They're really still figuring it out, more so now than ever in college basketball, honestly. I mean, continuity is something that you just don't see at the high major level. So I do think it's a big deal there, especially like you said, in the with the guards, in terms of being able to understand the offense, run whatever big men that might go through the door. Obviously, when you have a big man who can pass and understands an offense and you can run through him, it's very different. But not a lot of teams really do that. And so, yeah, having guards who can initiate and also get their own shot when necessary is a very big deal. So I'm sure we'll see those types of stats sort of improve for a team like Florida over the season. I mean, they haven't really been taking very many good shots, and I think that's just something that will obviously change. So still going to be a good team at keeping you out of the rim and 3 shots that can win it for you, but they're allowing a lot of free throws and letting their opponents hit good shots. I think Florida will be all right. I think if anything, if you think that they just start stomping, their opponents, which they probably will, they play like 3 games against in other teams located in Florida. So it should be a good proving ground, especially getting that first loss off their back. They're going to have an unperfect record immediately. So I think this is probably, until maybe they play Duke, that Duke UConn back-to-back games in early December is a pretty nice spot if but I think you might want to buy in before that if you like them, and this might be a decent opportunity. Might not get too many better.
Yep, and I do think that that was a really good opportunity to be able to exploit that, and I know you do a great job with this, as Justin Perri does such amazing work over at Chalk Value Bets. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Soups with regards to these early results. When do you want to be making adjustments on teams versus when you want to be sort of standing pat? Because you always do a great job of looking at the advanced numbers. You were talking about how BYU probably got a little bit unlucky with regards to the overall shooting against Villanova to not be able to cover that game, and when it comes to a team like BYU, even though they didn't cover, I still feel relatively good about them. And then there are other teams where you just feel a little bit worse about them. How do you sort of decipher that data? Because I do think that there's a big difference between cold shooting versus really not great offense whatsoever, and being able to decipher that difference, I think, is massive this time of year as we're finally starting to get data.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to really include stuff we've seen in exhibitions. And so that means that we're really getting one game of data. And yes, you can try to pick through it and understand what's going on, but at some level, it's not really enough. I think for most people, they can make educated guesses and try to get through the X's and O's to figure out whose strategy might be able to generate better shots and handicap games that way. But in terms of where I'm at, like, I definitely want more data to start really hitting things the way I usually do. I think my sweet spot usually is that the end of November through like the middle of December in terms of having the combination of bookmaker potential to beat them to the number, and then enough confidence in my stuff, because at some level we do have so many things that are changing, and it is a little bit difficult to beat the number when you have to account for so many things at such a wide range. So picking my spots early, not really up to full strength and sort of waiting, is something that I do, which is very different than a lot of people who do hit the ground hard in day one. But the potency for the way that this expected data that I really do hang my hat on so much at this point, the way it works is that it does take that 3 to 4 game period to really hit the sweet spot. It will allow me to sort of tell that difference, though, that you just had brought up, Greg, where you said, what are just cold shots and what are bad shots, what's good offense and what's good shooting. I mean, those are things that really can make or break your understanding of numbers, right? Like you go to Ken Palm or Haslametrics, they do have certain levels of understanding of expected numbers, possessions, all these things you can formulate in and out. But the difference is that, we really actually look at the true space every shot has when it's taken. And I think having that edge and knowing how to use it over, these years is more valuable than trying to dive in when I'm not really at full confidence. So I think for me, telling that difference is really waiting a game or two more and really trying to dig into a better sample of shots rather than in the first week, which I know is kind of boring, but that's my strategy at least.
And how much do you take a look at these opening games as being ones that are just a little bit different than the rest? Because I always notice early on during the season, we typically see a lot of overs, mainly because teams are looking to play a little bit faster. They're looking to get guys the ball. You're seeing just a lot of blowouts where things turn into open gym in the second half as well, where we're not going to be seeing that as much in conference play. And I think that brings a little bit of a different dynamic in and of itself as well.
I think we're seeing a fair amount of overs. I think it's a little high right now, for sure. I think it's something like 56% early on. It's kind of normal. I think, the numbers will adjust pretty quick. I think, we do have a lot of these very lopsided games that tend to go over. I'd love to plot like that correlation between the spread and the number past the over line and see like if the bigger spreads do more often lead to this over tendency, which I'm not going to immediately say I think it would, but it wouldn't surprise me to see games that get out of hand sort of start to play a much faster sort of in the gym scrimmage type game once sort of a foregone conclusion that there's not going to be a debate on who wins the game, and players play a little bit more freely. They don't play as tough defense. No one wants to get hurt. I think that's something that, people sometimes need to consider. Teams up by 23 at half. I mean, the second half, it's kind of a little bit of a no-no to be bodying someone and like potentially hurting someone playing at that level when it really gets into blowout level. And sometimes sort of I don't know, it gets a little casual, right? At some level, the games turn into sort of clinics and then everyone sort of takes their foot off the defensive gas. I mean, again, you can predict that. I think that's very predictable. I think you can find those spots and you can take alternate totals and try to get plus money spots for sure. I think there's definitely, if you can dig in properly, you can do that. But I would expect the numbers to adjust pretty quickly. There haven't been a lot of reasons to, take away teams either against the spread, right? Like it's been a lot of home teams at a similar rate. It's been a lot of favorites. So, I'm sure the sports books are going to pull those numbers up very fast because that's the last thing they want to have happen is favorites and overs winning. So I would expect maybe even a little bit of an overcorrection and maybe, that snap back to happen even quicker than we think.
Yep, I am expecting the exact same thing. And as a matter of fact, as we are doing this, it appears as though the night's games, we are starting to see a little bit of underwhelming action as well, which I always love to see. But a man that always overwhelms us with the fact that he is one of the most knowledgeable men that you're going to find covering college basketball. That'd be you, Justin. You do an absolutely incredible job over at Shot Quality Bets. I know you do some great work with Seth Davis and so much more. So love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, for sure. You can find out everything you want to know about the amazing data that we use at shotqualitybets.com. All our social handles are also at shotqualitybets. Bringing back our live betting show this week. Friday night, going to be a good time. We are, I think, one of the more unique shows in the space and one of the more unique websites in the space, really a data powerhouse at this point, and offering an ability to look in through games with shot quality scores, both as they're happening en masse, which I think is really important and really powerful when you're live betting, to be able to see the field all at once and not have to focus in on one game, and to be even alerted to certain game scenarios. So I think that's pretty important. And then, of course, the post-game analysis, to be able to understand where a team went right or wrong, where your bet was maybe lucky or unlucky, because this is a game of variance. And I mean, it is not pretty sometimes. And if you can run into a bad streak of just the teams you bet on not shooting well from the three for no other reason, we can tell you, oh, those were actually open shots. You weren't just missing bad shots and looking at the scoreboard and thinking I should be winning because they're taking more threes. Like, no, they were taking open threes, or they were the opposite in the mid-range, taking contested 2-point jumpers that they really shouldn't be. And you chose a team that didn't get good looks. How that can inform your process is sort of our whole thing. So if that's your speed, check out the show live Friday night and give us a follow over on any social media platform, and we'll be there talking about the data throughout the season.
Absolutely. And Justin, he's one of the best in the business of just taking a look at this amazing game of college basketball. The data that he uses is really second to none and has really been revolutionizing college basketball betting and so much more. And every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Justin for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops Style, part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Friday as we hit some bank shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops-Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Justin Perri, who does an amazing job over at Chalk Quality Bets. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So big thanks to Justin for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Friday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at gunit_81, and we are going to be going in Las Vegas rotation order. This is where we go with the games involving the big conference teams first, and then the games involving these conferences are going to be at the bottom in the extra games. That'd be the NEC, the Patriot League, the Southland, the SWAC, the MEAC, the Atlantic Sun, the America East. I think that we all got them. If I didn't say Big South as well. But how about if we do get things started with 675, 676. SIU Edwardsville is on the road against UTSA. Meet the Roadrunners are a 7.5 to an 8-point favorite. This game is 153 to 153.5. This time I total 154.5. I'm going to be in on the over. UTSA is a relatively up-tempo team. Austin Clonch has been that way ever since he was coaching at Nichols. He was an assistant for Nate Oates for a season over at Alabama as well. So you know that's a guy that likes to move and you take a look at what UTSA did last season. They were a top 85 team in terms of total possessions per game. SIU Edwardsville, under Coach Barron, they've been playing a little bit more slowly in recent years, but certainly a team that is going to give it up a little bit more defensively as well. This is a bit of a hit or miss sort of team that did lose a lot of their top guys from the team that was able to make the NCAA tournament 8 seasons ago. With this SIU Edwardsville team, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis last season, they were checking in actually right around about 48th in the country, but having all that turnover in the backcourt, I think is going to be hurting them, and now they do go up against a UTSA team that was a top 50 team in terms of turnovers force on a per possession basis, and that's a big reason why I'm going to be willing to lay with them. I set this line at an 8.5 with UTSA. They did a nice job in terms of bringing back a lot of their talented guys from a season ago. You've got back a lot of the ancillary pieces that were so rock solid for this team a season ago. I think that Mo Njai is a guy that has a chance to be able to take some strides forward, has been a well-traveled man over at SMU last year, over at UTSA. He was only able to start 8 games before he went down with an injury. He was supplying the team when he went down with about 4.5 rebounds per game. He should be able to help this team out in terms of winning that battle down low. I do think that Vashawn Alouette coming in was absolutely massive as well. For Alouette last season over at TCU was averaging 11.5 points per contest. They held him out of that that season opening game, so it's going to be interesting to see his status. I think that he should be in, but it would probably be rather limited in this one. But you also have in there Austin Nunez, who began his career over at Arizona State along with Ole Miss, just dealt with some injuries last season, but highly touted guy that should be able to take some strides forward for this unit. And then on the other end, I just don't necessarily feel great about the understudies stepping up for an SIU Edwardsville team that last season they were very much built around the versatility of Rayshon Taylor, was giving the team 19 points. He was doing just a little bit of this and that to be able to help dominate things. Ring Malaith, he is back from a season ago. He was able to generate for the team right around about 7 boards per contest at 6'9". He's able to go out there, pop it from 3-point range, so it's going to be able to help them out. But you're looking at Joe Valeri, a 6'5", a little bit of a do-it-all player that was limited to just 3 games a season ago, needing to take some strides forward. In his small sample size, he was averaging 8 points per contest, but now, in terms of the overall ball handling, you're probably going to be relying upon Jordan Pickett. Jordan Pickett, rock-solid player when he was able to get some minutes a season ago, really trapped in the shadow of Rayshon Taylor, but they're expecting him to take some big strides forward. I don't know if he's going to be able to do so against a UTSA unit that does a nice job generating turnovers and does a nice job in terms of being able to speed things up, and I do think that UTSA is going to turn things more harebrained and get the job done. I'm willing to lay up to 8 with the Road Runners, meep, and I like the over semi-total at a 154.5. 677, 678 on the card. It is Tulsa, and they're going to be playing against Rhode Island. This comes from Alumni Hall, so this is a neutral court game. Anywhere between -2 to -4 is that number on Rhode Island, so we're seeing some variance with regards to the number there. 154.5 to 155.5 is that total, and I said Tulsa is a 1.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take Tulsa outright on the money line, and you've got a little bit of, shall we say, a reuniting in this game because David Green, he was one of the top scorers over at Rhode Island last year, 14.2 points, 6 boards, shot 43% from 3. He's now playing for Tulsa, and for Tulsa, I think that they're going to be able to win the battle down low. Ian Smichael, he is back from a season ago. He was averaging 5.5 points, 5.5 boards per contest as a freshman. You've got a Rhode Island team that had the better rebound percentage a season ago, but the loss of Green is going to be rough. You bring in Mohamed So, who is a nice rebounder over at St. Peter's, and I do think that for Rhode Island after last year, it felt like they were starting to play a little bit too fast for their own good. I do think that they're going to try to dial it back a little bit. It's been a rough go of it for Tulsa under Eric Kunkel, but I really do feel like they've got their pieces all aligning together, and I do think that they're going to be able to hit at full force. Now with Rhode Island, bringing in Tyler Cochran is very big. He missed all of last season due to injury. Last we saw him 2 seasons ago over at Toledo, was averaging 14.5 points, 6.5 boards, and he was supposed to play at Minnesota last season. So there were high-power teams that were interested in him. What you're going to be able to get out of Jonah Hidden, I think, is going to be the X factor for this Rhode Island backcourt. 12 points in that season debut against Stetson, and for Rhode Island, they look very rock solid in terms of being able to get their offense going against Stetson. 93 points in that one. Stetson, traditionally a team that's well outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and even in that game with a lot of transition in the backcourt, you did see 14 turnovers out of Rhode Island. Now RJ Johnson, who comes over after he was a nice player at the Big South level for Charleston Southern a season ago, was able to give out 6 assists, but he only had 2 points, so I do have a few concerns there, and I do think that Tulsa is going to be able to get their ducks in a row with regards to that offense. Having David Green, who's able to shoot it really well from 3-point range, is big, and then Miles Barnstable, who is a nice 13-point per game scorer over at a St. Thomas team that was a top 15 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, is big, and then you also bring in Romad Dean. Dean over at Fordham last year, 5.5 boards, 7 points per contest. He's able to pop it from 3-point range. I think that the overall versatility of Tulsa and just the overall coaching of Eric Kunkel wins out. I just don't trust in Archie Miller in this sort of a spot, so I said Tulsa is a 1.5 point favorite. I like them outright on the money line. Made a total of a 153.5. Here at the 154.5, just a little bit too high for me. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on that under as well. 679, 680 on the card. It is Maryland, and they are going to be playing us to Georgetown. 7.5 to 8.5 point underdog. Settle on this game between a 147.5 to a 148.5. Set by line at 8.5. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 8 with Maryland. Maryland very much a new look team under Buzz Williams. They were able to do a nice job in terms of their opening day game, and for this bunch, I do think that for Maryland, they are going to be able to do a nice job of holding it down defensively because you've got so many of those guys that were good rebounders over at Texas A&M last season. Follow Buzz Williams on over to Maryland. You've got Farrell Payne, who had 21.6 boards in that season debut. He's going to do a nice job of locking it down low. Solomon Washington is a 5+ rebound per game guy guy that was really not able to get out there on the floor night number one, but you do have Elijah Saunders, and this is a team with some sneaky good depth. Saunders was a starter over at San Diego State and Virginia a season ago. Last year, Virginia shot about 35% from three. He's a 6'8", a little bit of a combo player, and then Darius Adams, I think, can be an X factor in the backcourt along with David Hewitt. Hewitt, 20-point per game scorer 2 seasons ago over at Northern Illinois, and then you bring in Mr. Adams, who is a very highly touted freshman on the other end. You have a Georgetown unit that last season they were very much built around their big man that was able to do a nice job of holding it down, and Thomas Sorber that got injured towards the back half of the season in those final 7 to 8 games they did not play. You could tell that the defense just really was not there, and for Georgetown they actually brought in some nice pieces. Malik Mack is back from a season ago after he was averaging 14 points, led the team in assists. KJ Lewis is a 10-point per game scorer that saw some starts over at Arizona. Vincent Ichuku is a former top 75 recruit that, the only reason why he has not been able to take off is that he had a heart issue a few seasons ago, but they're gambling on Deshaun Harris-Smith, who's ironically enough a former Maryland recruit. He's a former top 40 guy that just has never really been able to pan out. What are you going to be able to get out of him? How are all these pieces going to be able to fit together? Now, night number one for Georgetown, it was relatively rock solid. We saw that offense score 87 points despite the fact that they shot only 15% from three-point range, and this is going to be a unit that is going to leave something to be desired with regards to their three-point shooting. I think that they're very much going to be looking to go down low with Julius Halafuna, who's a true 7-footer from New Zealand. He's going to be able to take some minutes after he was limited to just 6 games a season ago for this Georgetown team. It's very clear that they're looking to play rough and tumble, that they're going to be looking to hit the boards a little bit more. So I did set more of a 148.5 total here in this one right now. I'm seeing a 147.5. I think that late game fouling is going to be just enough for this total to be able to go over, but I do think that with Maryland, having the likes of Hewitt and company in the backcourt going to be just enough for them to get the job done against a Georgetown team that just doesn't have a lot of chemistry right now. So I'm going to be willing to lay with Maryland, and I'm going to be in on that total over as well. 681, 682 on the card. Charlston is on the road against Liberty. Liberty Bibberty is a 6.5 to a 7.5 point favorite. So this game, it is 150.5 to a 151.5. Made my total at 147.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under. Now, Charleston, under Chris Mack last season, they were a team that really bombed it from three-point range. They, at home, were shooting over 40% from three. On the road, that did dip down to closer to about 33% from the outside, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they match up with a Liberty team that was a top 10 team with regards to their own three-point shooting as well. But as we know with Liberty, this is never a team that's really going to get out of sorts. This is never a team that is really going to play super-duper up-tempo. For Liberty, last season was actually a little bit faster for them than they have been in past years, but even with them playing at a little bit of a faster pace, they were still clocking in 285th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Meanwhile, College of Charleston, certainly a unit that has been certainly bumping up their tempo a little bit, 58th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Charleston does lose a few pieces from a season ago, and with Liberty, they actually do a nice job of holding on to a lot of those pieces, but Liberty did lose that top scorer in Talon Peter from a season ago, who was bombing it at 45% from three-point range. And then Caden Metheny, he's out of the fold. Now, I love the versatility of Zach Cleveland, not a guy that's going to light it up from three-point range, and that is very much the identity of this Liberty team, with them shooting 39% from distance a season ago, but 11 points, 6 boards, 5 assists for a man that stands right around 6'7" last season. That's very rock solid. Looked good night number one. As well, they got 29 points out of Brett Decker Jr. I did not necessarily see that coming from a guy that last season was really not too much of a big-time factor for this team. I think that Colin Porter is really going to be a guy that they look to in that backcourt after last season as a starter. 9 points, 4 assists. He's able to do a nice job in terms of being able to run the offense. Has never been necessarily the most prolific of scorers, but that said, rock solid there. And Caden Metheny is back in the fold. I think I might have misspoken when I was talking about Talon Peter being out, but that said, he was a guy that was giving you about 12 points per contest last season. But with Charleston, even though they do lose a few of those pieces from a season ago, I just thought that they had one of the best transfer portal hauls in all of college basketball, and that's a big reason why I'm going to be willing to bank on them in this spot. With Charleston, they bring in a guy that 2 seasons ago, when he was over at Bradley, was a rock-solid guard that was putting in their 14 points per contest, was able to shoot in that neighborhood about 38 or so percent from three, and Connor Hickman. This is a guy that I think has a lot of upside. Now, he was unable to get out there on the floor night number 1 for this Charlston team, but he should be good to go in this game. You bring in Jalen Counter, who has been around the block over at Middle Tennessee, IU Indy, and he's been a double-figure scorer each of the last 3 seasons. He had 7 assists in that opening game. Mr. Dean, first name Mr., last name Dean. He was a 15-plus point per game scorer over at USC Upstate. Christian Reeves is a true 7'2" big man that began his career over at Duke and Clemson. That's going to be a load for Liberty to take on, as Liberty outside the top 340 in terms of their percentage of missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. And then Kobe Duggan had one of the best conference sort of runs that you saw in all of college basketball over at Campbell last season. 6'7" combo player. I think that the overall talent of Charleston is going to be able to help them hold in there. Again, you have a little bit of question mark as to whether or not you're going to get Hickman out there on the floor, but this is a very deep Charleston team, one that I think is very well coached under Chris Mack, and I don't know if Charleston gets the job done, but I think that they're going to be able to put a nice scare into Liberty here, so I semi-line at 3.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Charleston, and I'm going to be in on the under as well with Liberty's slow and controlled style. 683, 684 on the card. The Ohio State University plays host to Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne is a underdog of 21.5 points. So on this game, it is 162.5 to a 163.5, and I'm in on the under. I did semi-total here at a 155.5. Fort Wayne is obviously an up-tempo team, but Ohio State's offensive numbers might be warped for the first few games of the season because they played against an IU Indy team that they had a coach in Mr. Ben Howlett take over, who was running a West Liberty system that was averaging 100 points per contest. We have seen just how prolific that IU Indy team is to begin the season, so I think that was a little bit more of a byproduct of that rather than Ohio State looking to play at warp speed. And Ohio State is still going to be a nice offensive team. You bring back one of the more experienced guards and one of the better guards in all of college basketball, and Bruce Sorton, who last season was shooting over 40% from 3, 4 assists, 12 plus points per contest to go along John Mobley. That's a nice place to be able to start. Christoph Tilley had 28 points, night number 1 for Ohio State. I don't think that that's a norm, but a true 7-footer that comes over from Santa Clara was able to pop it and lock it from 3-point range. Brandon Noel at 6'8" comes in from Wright State. He's got some versatility, and I do think that this team has better depth than they've had in past seasons. Devin Royal is rock solid. They are dealing with an injury to Josh Ojawana, a true 7-footer that was expected to be a nice low post presence. So I actually do think that that speeds up Ohio State a little bit. But even with that, I did set my total at a 155.5. You do have a Purdue Fort Wayne team that's in quite a bit of transition with their backcourt. They're going to be looking to DeAndre 3000 Craig, a nice 12-point per game scorer over at Denver 8 seasons ago, to take things over along with Mikhail Stevenson, who was a solid 12-point per game guy when he was over at Grambling. Neither of these guys are flamethrowers from 3-point range, but they're solid 3-point shooters. With Fort Wayne, where they're really going to lose this battle is down low. They were outside the top 300 with regards to rebound percentage 8 seasons ago. They do lose quite a few of those guys, saying Maximus Nelson, who had just 1 rebound in that opening night loss. So you do have to have some question marks as to whether you're going to be able to get down low. Corey Hadnot is a nice backcourt piece for this Fort Wayne team as well. He was averaging last year about 9 points per game in a 6-man role, was shooting 39% from 3-point range, but now a lot more goes on to his plate. And for Fort Wayne, last season, this was one of the best teams in all of college basketball generating turnovers, a top 40 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They were also a unit that was in the top 10 in terms of taking care of the ball. I don't think that they're going to be taking care of the ball quite as well with all the turnover that they've had in the backcourt. I think that Ohio State is going to be able to utilize this to their advantage. I do think that those added turnovers from a season ago is going to be able to help this game stay under the total. So it is a circumstance where I set my total at a 155.5. I think that a little bit more order is restored after Ohio State played that very, very harebrained game where they scored 118 points on IU Indy. So I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under. And with Ohio State, set them as a 23.5 point favorite. I'm willing to lay the 21.5 here. 685, 686 is on the board. It is Furman playing host to Troy. The men of Troy are a 2-point underdog. Tonight's game is 152, and I'm going to be willing to lay with Furman. I recognize that Furman had a rough night number 1 loss. They lose a high point by 25 plus points, and they give up 97 in the process, but I did set Furman as a 6.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to dive in here. For Troy, I still have a lot of question mark in terms of that offense. In their opening night win against Kent State, they shot over 44% from 3-point range, but a season ago, this was one of the most paltry offenses in all of college basketball. For Troy, they were really good in terms of being able to grab offensive rebounds. They were a top 10 team in terms of percentage of their missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound, but with the likes of Tate Connerway and company on the fold, that's going to be hurting them. For Troy last season, 341st in 3-point shooting percentage, 328th in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis with their offense as well. Now, for Troy, 12 of 26 from three-point range, now number one against Kansas State again. I think that was a little bit of a flash in the pan, and I do think that we are going to be seeing some negativity, especially coming up against a bunch in Furman that they bring back a lot of pieces from a season ago. I do recognize that they lose a lot of their guys, like a PJ Smith, who out there in the backcourt, he was averaging about 16 plus points per contest. He was their main scorer, but you do retain some guys that stand right around about 6'11" and Cooper Bowser, along Charles Johnson. Johnson, in that night number one performance, he was able to supply the team with 16 points, and last season he was giving the team about 5.5 points, 3 boards per contest, but at 6'11" was shooting about 38% from three-point range. That's really good versatility. This team always does a nice job of going down to the non-Division I ranks, being able to find some talent. They're going to be looking to Asa Thomas, who he was just unable to get out there on the floor over at Clemson last season, to have a bit of upside at 6'7" as a nice wing. I do think that they're going to be able to have that, and it appears as though Cooper Bowser is going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit at 6'11". He did have 4 assists in that number one performance last year. Darn near 2 assists, a block and a half per contest. Very, very versatile big man, even though he doesn't necessarily pop it from three-point range, and I do think that Troy is going to have a little bit of a tough time with that. Now, Furman, a little bit of fear that you don't necessarily have that tried and true point guard, but that's it for Troy. Lots of moving parts with Theo Song needing to step up big time. He did have 24 points in that win over Kent State, and Thomas Dowd, he is a rock-solid piece down the line. He's going to be able to help this team generate a lot of second and third chances on the glass. Last year, 9.5 points, 7 boards. He's able to shoot it from 3, but his career about 32% three-point shooter, so you can't expect a ton there, but is someone like Cooper Campbell, who had 19 points at number one, going to be able to duplicate that after last season. He came off the bench for about 5 points per contest, albeit he was one of the better three-point shooters at about 35.5% from 3, and I do think that two things can be true. Troy was a really bad three-point shooting team a season ago. I think that they're better this season. I also do think that the addition of Corbin Green, who was solid over at Air Force a few seasons ago, is going to be able to help them out a little bit, but I think that was a little bit of an outlier, what we saw against Kansas State. I do think that there's a bit of regression. I do think that Furman, a team that has been relatively solid at guarding the three-point arc, has been a little bit more rough down low. They do find a way to be able to get the job done here, what I think is going to be a bit of a lower scoring game. Set my total at a 148.5, like the under, and with Furman willing to lay up to 6 points with them. 687, 688 on the card. UW Green Bay is on the road against Buffalo. Let's go Buffalo. A 6.5 to a 7-point favorite for the Bulls. 153 to 155 is the total. Set my total 155.5. I'm going to be in on the under. UW Green Bay just ghastly with regards to their defense. Gave up 90 plus in their season opening loss against Kansas, which honestly there's not a lot of shame in that, but UW Green Bay last year, well outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I actually did take the points here with UW Green Bay. I mean, it's grody, it's sad, but Marcus Hall was a 13 point per game scorer a season ago over at UW Green Bay. I think that he's going to be able to help them out. Now Green Bay scored just 51 points, number one, but Hall had 17 points, 4 rebounds in that game. They bring back a guy in Preston Rudinger, who I really like. Last season for Green Bay, he was able to supply the team with about 8 points per contest, mid-30s three-point shooter, and I think that he takes some strides forward. Now again, they're being coached by a radio show host. That's not necessarily great, and this is not a UW Green Bay team that's going to have a whole heck of a lot of anything down low. They're probably going to be looking to Caden Wilkins, who he comes in as a non-Division I transfer. He's going to look to hold down the fort for this team. And then on the other end, you've got a Buffalo team that they themselves have a lot of issues. They bring back Ryan Sable, who was able to give the team 12 points per contest last season. And in that season opener, he did have 32 points. Noah Batchelor should be able to control things down low, a guy that began his career over at Maryland. He had, for the team, 11 rebounds in that season opening win. And I do think that for Buffalo, there is going to be quite a bit of upside for them with regards to low post play in this one, and they did get a nice win over Southern Miss. Southern Miss is another team that has a lot of dysfunction and is not necessarily a team that I trust in too much, and for Buffalo, it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to be able to do a better job of being able to take care of the ball. They had just 8 turnovers against Southern Miss, but Southern Miss is not a team that's necessarily a heat-seeking missile, and they did lose their main facilitator from a season ago, who he was turning the ball over quite a bit and died done. He was giving the team 5.5 assists per contest, but also turned the ball over 4 times per game. There's still a little bit of transition there, so I do think that the UW Green Bay backcourt keeps them in this one. I do think that the overall rebounding of Buffalo allows them to be able to get the job done outright, but these are 2 bad teams that are really going at it, and I do think that we're going to be seeing a lack of defense in this game. So by total 155.5, I'm going to be one thing shot on the over, and at 6+, give me the points here with UW Green Bay. 689, 690 on the card. Iona is going to be playing us Hofstra. The pride of Hofstra is a 1 to 2 point favorite total on this game between 144 to 145, and I made Iona the 3.5 point favorite. I do like them outright here on the money money line for Iona. They go to the NBA ranks to make their coaching change after Tobin Anderson, after 2 years, very surprisingly, was canned in the offseason. But for Iona, I do think that they did a nice job of being able to just retool things. This is their first true game of the season. They did not play opening night, so we're going to see how all these pieces are going to be able to fit together. Someone like a CJ Anthony, I think, is a nice upside guy who just has dealt with injuries over his last few seasons. He started his career over at Cincinnati, just was unable to stay healthy, was unable to stay out there on the floor. Luke Jungers is actually one of the main holdovers from a season ago, 5.5 points per contest, high 33-point shooter at 6'9", so that's going to be able to give them some nice versatility. And I do think that for Iona, they're going to do a nice job of being able to hold it down low with bringing in a guy like a Matt Reed, who in his 2 seasons, when he was over at Tulsa, was averaging about 3.5 boards, 4 points per game, and a little bit of a reserve role. I think that he's going to be able to give this team some rough and tumble. And Chase Comier, I thought that was a really nice under-the-radar transfer pickup coming over from Wofford, where he was shooting 50% from three-point range 2 seasons ago, was unable to get out there on the floor last season, but he and Denver Anglin, I think, are going to do a nice job in the backcourt. And then for Hofstra, they were actually number 1 in the country last year in opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. You do have a guy in Silas Sunday, he's a true 7-footer. He had 6 rebounds in that night, number 1 win, and you bring back Cruz Davis, who I absolutely love him in the backcourt. Last year, Cruz Davis did a nice job of putting in there 14.5 points, 4.5 assists per game, but Gene Amarujan being out of the fold and stuff. Yaquan Saunders was a really nice backcourt piece. They did not have him out there on the floor, so now they're looking at A.J. Willis to be able to help take over this offense. For Willis last season, he was over at Wyoming, came off the bench, was a nice spark plug 3-point shooter at 43%, but it was on low volume. He was only putting in there about 5 points per contest. Now he's going to be looked at as being a big-time piece, and you do have a guy in Speedy Claxton who played in the NBA, so I do think that Hofstra's guard play is going to be just fine. Silas Sunday, what are you going to be able to get out of him down low? That's a big-time question mark, and it feels like the overall depth of this backcourt may not be there with regards to this Hofstra team. Cruz Davis is a nice place to be able to start, but is Preston Eadman going to be able to step up around him? I don't know, and I do think that even though for Iona it's quite a bit of a changeover, going to a little bit more of an NBA system, I think that they find a way to get the job done. And keep in mind, Hofstra, well outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, they do a nice job of not allowing a lot of easy twos, so I did set my total here at a 143.5. I think that this is just a scotch too high at 145. I mean, on the under, I do like Iona outright on the money line. 691, 692 on the card. St. Bernard is on the road against Duquesne. Duquesne is a favorite of 11 points, and throughout this game, you're going to be finding it at a 152.5 to a 153.5. I did set a total of a 144.5. I do like the under for St. Bernard. This is a team that's looking to play up tempo. They were in the top 75 in the country last year in terms of total possessions per game. Duquesne outside the top 310 in terms of total possessions per game. Old situation of something's got to give. I do think that there's going to be some speed bumps, and for St. Bernard, they do lose a lot of guys like Tanner Thomas and company that were really versatile 3-point shooters from a season ago, but I'm still going to be willing to take the points with them. I did set St. Bernard as a 8.5 point underdog, even though St. Bernard does lose a little bit of the versatility from a season ago. I think that bringing in Jan Farrell, who's been around the block, was a former starter over at St. Bonaventure, is going to be able to help the team out a little bit more down low. He's capable of launching a few threes as well at 6'7", but bringing back Makai Conneru, a guy that was able to give the team right around about 8.5 points per contest a season ago, I thought that was absolutely massive for the St. Bernard team. And I think that St. Bernard is just a really sneaky team in general that is going to be able to provide some upside, not just in this game, but just overall moving forward. I think that a lot of the guards are going to be able to take a little bit of a leap forward this season. And for St. Bernard, even though they don't necessarily have a lot of those guys that are like 6'7", 6'8", they're able to launch from 3-point range. Having a guy like a Deshaun Gittins, who he comes into the program after he had Fleur Nashville was averaging about 8.5 points per contest 8 seasons ago. I think that that's big for them. I do think that this team is going to be looking to go a little bit more down low, and I do think that with the St. Bernard team, they're going to be slowed down a little bit from past years. And Duquesne, they just play a slow and controlled style in general, which is why I do like the under, but I think that they hold in there against a Duquesne team that they had a very impressive night number 1 performance, but with Duquesne, they were a unit that really struggled with regards to their 3-point shot 8 seasons ago. Bringing in Terrence Gunyard was able to help out with that. He had 19 points in that season debut, and John Hughley is a nice upside guy that I think is going to do a nice job in the post. You can recall many years ago over at Pittsburgh, 15 points, right around about 8 points per contest. I think that he wins that battle down low, but I do think that Sacred Heart, with her just interchangeability, I think is going to be able to hold in there against a Duquesne team that they do have a fresh backcourt and had 17 turnovers in that opening night game. So I did set my line at a 144.5 with regards to total in on the under, and the points here with Sacred Heart, 693, 694 on the card. It is Tennessee Tech on the road against Charlotte. Charlotte is a favorite of 13.5 points. So this game is 151. I said Charlotte is just a 8.5 point favorite. I'm going to be one take the points with Tennessee Tech. Now Tennessee Tech is missing quite a bit of that backcourt from a season ago, so that is going to be a little bit of a hampering to them, but it's a Charlotte unit that last year they played very slow and controlled. They were outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. Tennessee Tech a little bit more of a mid-tempo team a season ago. We did see Charlotte bumping up against Indiana State, a 92-76 win to begin the season, but that's an Indiana State team that they're looking to play all sorts of harebrained and out of control. Bringing in Zane Mingo, I think, was big for Charlotte, who last season over at Marshall, he was able to give the team right in that neighborhood of about like 12.5 points per contest, 5 assists per contest. So I think that he's going to be a nice upside guy for a Charlotte team that really didn't turn the ball over a lot last season. They were just really bad from 3-point range. They were shooting in the neighborhood about like 32% from 3 as a collective. In that opening night game, they shot 47% from 3-point range. I just don't think that Lightning is going to be striking twice. Though I do think that they're much better than they were from 3-point range a season ago, bringing in someone like a Devontae Harrison, who was shooting 40% from 3-point range at Southern Indiana a season ago, is a nice place to be able to start. Ben Bradford, he had 31 points in that season opening game against Indiana State after he had just 2.5 points per contest a season ago. I think two things can be true. He's taking a stride forward, and also I don't think that he's going to duplicate that, but also bringing in Major Freeman from Siena, that helps him out. But for Tennessee Tech, even though they lose the Johnsons out there in the backcourt, I like what Mekhi Cameron is able to bring to the table. He's got some good versatility at 6'4". Last season was limited to just 7 games due to injury. When he was actually out there on the floor, he was putting in there 9 points, about 3 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's going to really light you up from 3-point range, but I do think that Tennessee Tech has a chance to be able to hold in there on the glass against a Charlotte team that does not have a lot down low. I think it's going to be up to Jawan Nichols. Nichols last season was putting in there about 4 boards, 8.5 points per contest, and he's a guy that at 6'8" is pretty much a load to be able to take down low. So I do think that he's going to be able to do a nice job in this game of being able to match up. And I do think that having Brandon Mutu, who hopefully I got that name correct, comes over from Western Michigan. He was a nice 6-point per game scorer that came off the bench 2 seasons ago, shot 42% from 3. He's going to be able to lend some upside for Tennessee Tech in what I think is going to be a little bit of a lower scoring game. Again, Charlotte, they had that big night number 1 performance against Indiana State. I think that that's more the Indiana State style rather than anything else. So I did set my total 144.5, like the under and the points here with Tennessee Tech. 695, 696 on the card. It is Davidson, and they're going to be playing us at Washington State. Washington State does find themselves as a road underdog of 2.5 to 4 points, and so on this game, you're going to be getting it at a 153.5, and I do like Washington State outright on the money line. I did set them as a favorite of 2.5 points. With Davidson, they do lose a lot of their pieces from a season ago, and with Davidson, they had a lot of good versatility from last year, guys that were 6'6" plus that were able to really bomb it from 3-point range, and they do maintain a little bit of that from a season ago, but ever since Bob McKillop really retired and passed the torch on over to Matt McKillop, things just have not necessarily been the same for the Davidson team. Still a relatively slow and controlled team outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, and Washington State in this system, they're looking to absolutely gun it. They were a top 50 team under David Riley in terms of total possessions per game, and Washington State did lose a lot from a season ago, but Thomas Thraston, due to injury, he saw some good minutes towards the end of the 2024-25 season. He was able to show that on full display night number 1 with being able to put in there 17 points. And then Dron Morton, I think, is an upside guy that a lot of people are sleeping upon. Comes in from Morehead State, where last season he was giving the team 10.5 points, shot 37.5% from 3-point range. I think that he's a really good fit with this system, even though he comes over from a Morehead State team that played a very slow and controlled style of basketball. And then Emmanuel Ugbo, it looks like they're going to be featuring him a lot down low after he was a part-time starter over at Boise State a season ago. Really couldn't find his footing with Boise State, but I mean, at 6'8", he is a guy that's able to run the floor. He's able to pop it a little bit from 3-point range, and I think that that's going to be a bother to a Davidson team that, again, I think that they're just in a lot of transition. They were able to take down their non-Division I opponent very easily night number 1, and Hunter Adam is going to need to be a big-time piece for this team. He had a nice number 1 performance last year, was coming out off the bench and did shoot 40% from 3-point range off the bench, but it was in, shall we say, a little bit of a smaller role. They've got Josh Govins along Parker Fredrickson, who I think are upside guys. Fredrickson, 2 seasons ago over at Wake Forest, was a nice 3-point shooter, but he's really a one-trick pony sort of guy. Scovins, he was a do-it-all player over at Army with about 15 points, 4.5 boards. He was able to give you a block per contest at 6'6", but that main facilitator, that's a little bit of a question mark, and they're probably going to be leaning upon Sam Brown, who comes over from Penn, to be able to hold that down, but he wasn't necessarily a primary point guard over at Penn as well. I do think that lack of a main facilitator for Davidson, that is going to be hurting them quite a bit. They're probably going to be looking a little bit to RJ Greer in the backcourt as well, but I do think that in the end, Washington State, who plays a little bit of harebrained style, they get it done against a Davidson team that really has a lack of size after they lose so many of those guys that were really nice, like Bailey and company from a season ago. So it is a circumstance where on the road, I set Washington State as a 2.5 point favorite. I do like them on the money line. Washington State looking to gun it. Davidson looking to play relatively slow. I do think that this is more of a mid-tempo game as a result, set by total at a 150.5. I like the under. 697, 698 on the card. You got Siena on the road against Brown. What can Brown do for you? Well, if they win this game, they'll probably make you guys some money. They're anywhere between 1 to 3 point favorites. So this game is between 144 to 146.5. So I'm seeing a little bit of variance out there in the market, and I did set my total at a 139. I do like this total under. You've got a pair of teams that are not necessarily looking to gun it. Siena was a mid-tempo team if you look at total possessions per game, but they would have been well outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game if you looked at regulation and regulation only, because they played a lot of overtime games 8 seasons ago. Meanwhile, you've got a Brown team that they were about a 186th in the country last season in terms of total possessions per game. Now, Brown has to go through the transition of no longer having Keno Lilly Jr., and that's why I set Brown as only a 1 point favorite. Right now, I'm seeing a 3 out there with Siena. I'm willing to take those points. I really don't want Siena outright on the money line, mainly because we have seen Siena have a lot of close games, and quite a few of those close games last season did not quite go the way of the Siena Saints, but I do think that Jerry McNamara is actually doing a nice job of being able to coach up this team, and for Siena, they do bring back quite a bit of experience from a season ago. Having Justice Schultz, who was a double-figure scorer, was doling out 3+ assists per contest, is a nice place to be able to start. Brandon Coyle, he last season shot 39% from 3, 13 points per contest at 6'7". This guy has all sorts of versatility. I love what he's able to bring to the table. Gavin Doty is a nice piece out there in the backcourt as well. They do lose more of those guys that were able to do a nice job in terms of giving you shot blocks down low, like you've got Devin Bradford out of the fold, Miles Wilmus, so that does hurt this team a little bit. But on the other end for Brown, again, lots of transition in terms of losing the main guy in Keno Lilly Jr. for this team. So the question becomes, are they going to have one guy be able to step up and really become that main scorer for them? Because you did have last year Landon Lewis do a nice job down low. He returns after he was able to supply the team with about 13.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game, and you do have to think that more in terms of the backcourt, that they're going to be looking to Alexander Lesbitt to be able to step up after he had 10.5 points per contest. At 6'5", he's probably not going to be like a primary ball handler, but certainly is a guy that's able to pop it and lock it from 3-point range. And then it becomes guys like Malcolm Riceby Jefferson, who didn't necessarily have the biggest year last year, to be able to take a stride forward. You just don't get transfers out there in the Ivy League, so they're relying upon a lot of these guys being able to take steps forward. And I do think that for Brown, with them being out there on the home floor and having a rock-solid piece in Lewis Elmo, I do think that they should be the very, very slight favorite. I set them as a 1 point favorite, so being able to get 3 here with Siena, I'm going to be willing to take those points. And on the under, I set my total at a 139. 699, 700 on the card. It is Purdue, and they are going to be playing us to Oakland. Oakland is a sizable underdog. You're going to be finding Oakland as an underdog. I'm right now seeing 30.5 points, and your total is between 153.5 to a 154. I did set a total of 146.5. I'm going to be liking the under. Now for Purdue, one of the top offenses in all of college basketball last year. They were, in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, number 11 in the country, 17th in terms of 3-point shooting percentage. You bring back Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. Lawyer shot well over 40% from 3-point range last season, looked really good night number 1. And then with what you're able to get out of Braden Smith, so much versatility, 6+ assists, 5+ rebounds, 14+ points per contest. Like, this guy really does a tremendous job in terms of being able to stuff the stat sheet, but that's it for Purdue. They're not really a super up-tempo team. They were outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game 8 seasons ago, and Oakland was outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game as well. Oakland was a very poor 3-point shooting team last year. They were outside the top 325 in terms of 3-point shooting percentage, so they went the non-Division I route in terms of bringing in guys like Coy Thurman and company that they hope to be able to elevate this backcourt along with Brody Robinson, who was over at UT Arlington. At Arlington, Robinson, 4.5 assists, 9.5 points per contest. I actually really like his game. But for this Oakland team, they become a little bit more of a low post team with Tobari Navarua, who he was able to give the team 5+ rebounds per game 8 seasons ago. He figures to be a big-time piece for the team. And then Isaac Garrett, who comes in from Salt Lake Community College. He was at 6'9", able to really shoot it from three-point range. He figures to be a nice mixer and shaker for this Oakland team as well. But for Oakland, even though they gave up the north of 100 points against Michigan, I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a lower tempo team. We saw Purdue give up fewer than 55 points, night number 1 against Evansville. I think that a lot of people are noting that Purdue backcourt, but down low, when you add in there the top rebounder in all of college basketball, Oscar Clough, that does make this team a much better defensive team. I think that the number is getting a little bit out of sorts. I set my line at 28.5, so at 30, I'm going to be willing to take those points with Oakland, but set a total of 146.5. I like the under. 7-1, 7-2 on the card. It is Notre Dame, and they play host to Detroit. Detroit is finding themselves as a sizable underdog of anywhere between 19 to 19.5 points. So on this game is between 148.5 to 149, and made a total of 142. I do like the under for Detroit. Under Coach Montgomery, last season they were a relatively, shall we say, controlled team in terms of total possessions per game. Detroit was finding themselves in that neighborhood of about 166th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and just Micah Shrewsbury's system in general is not necessarily fast. It's highly efficient offense, but it's not necessarily warp speed. 245th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I do think that Notre Dame is going to be able to really take hold in this one. I'm going to be willing to lay the number, as I did set Notre Dame as a 20-point favorite, mainly because Marcus Burton should be able to just take over the show in this one. For Marcus Burton, 20-plus points per contest when he was out there on the floor last season, does a nice job of being able to hit the glass. He's able to give you a bit of facilitation as well. I just absolutely love his game, and when it comes to the rest of this Notre Dame squad, they did a nice job in terms of being able to put nice pieces around him to be able to accentuate what he's able to do. You got Micah Shrewsbury back, who's a double-figure scorer that's able to shoot in the mid-30s from three. Carson Tout only had 2 points in his season opening game for Detroit, but he had 19 rebounds in that game. Garrett Sondra has been a guy that's been in the system for a few years, along Kiba Njai. I think that they're nice upside pieces down low, and for Detroit, I just have no idea how they're going to be able to match up in the post with this Notre Dame team, because for Detroit, they just don't necessarily have a ton with regards to size. Legend Geeter has been with Eastern Michigan along Detroit, always is able to give you like 4 or 5 rebounds per game, but they're really relying upon Orlando Lovejoy to do a little bit of everything. Top scorer from season ago, 16.5 points, 4.5 boards, 3.5 assists per game, but a career less than 25% three-point shooter. This team just does not have a lot from the outside. They shot just 20% in their season opening game, which they're going to shoot a little bit better than 20% for the season, but still, you've got a shortage of outside shooting. You're looking at Nate Johnson in the backcourt, who he was a starter last year that gave the team 8.5 points, but again, shot 30% from three-point range. Notre Dame is going to dare them to take threes because now they're a bit more rock solid down low with Carson Tout, and I do think that Notre Dame dominates this game, and I do think that's a lower tempo game. I set my total at a 142, like the under, and I'm willing to lay up to 19.5 with Notre Dame. 7-3, 7-4 on the betting board. Valparaiso is on the road taking on Ketucky. Ketucky, very sizable favorites here. You're going to be finding them at 32.5 points. So on this game, it is 155.5 to 156.5, and I'm going to be willing to take those points with Valparaiso. I did set Valparaiso as a 27.5 point underdog. Ketucky held below 80 points against Nichols. That was a game where neither team could hit a three to save their lives, and I do think that we are going to see that Kentucky scoring really be able to kick it northward. You've got a guy in Ortega Owe back from season ago who's averaging 15 plus points per contest, and I do think that bringing in Jalen Lowe, who was averaging over 4 assists per game over at Pittsburgh last season, that's rock solid. And Denzel Aberdeen made his presence known right away, coming on over from Florida, where he was a nice ancillary piece for them 8 seasons ago. He was able to put in their 10.6 assists in that game against Nichols, and he was putting in their darn near 8 points per contest over at Florida 8 seasons ago. And well, you don't have Jaden Quantance right now down low for Kentucky. Malachi Moreno's a true 7-footer that as a freshman, he had 9 rebounds at his debut. Andrei Jelovich, he was able to get eligibility late in the process. He's a guy that at 6'11" has some good versatility for this unit. And Colin Chandler had a really good night number 1 performance as well. Looks like he's going to be good to take some strides forward. But for Valparaiso, even though they do lose Mr. Wright in the backcourt, which that was one of the best names in all of college basketball, when you've got a guy by the name of All Right, that does make things not so all right when you lose a guy like that. But Isaiah Barnes is a former top 200 recruit that began his career at Michigan, was a starter over at Tulsa last 2 seasons. He was averaging about 9.5 points, mid-30s three-point shooter 8 seasons ago. He's a nice upside guy at 6'7" as a wing. You're going to have a little bit of a, shall we say, issue in terms of point guard spot. Mark Brown is probably going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit. I would not be surprised if Justin McNair sees the ball in his hands quite a bit as well. These are 2 guys that are looking to take some strides forward, as McNair was in the system 8 seasons ago. And in terms of the size down low, well. It is going to be a little bit tough for Valparaiso. Even someone like a Jerome Palm, who didn't see a ton of minutes, he was always a relatively good rebounder for this team, but I do think that there's reason to believe that Carter Hapoi, who comes over from New Zealand, should be able to give the team a bit of upside. He was able to put in their 6 boards in their season debut, 6'11" big man that is a little bit of an international man of mystery, and JT Pettigrew is someone that they're going to be looking to quite a bit as well. A star freshman that saw the start, and he was able to pull in their 4 boards. He doesn't have a ton of versatility. He took 1-3 in that season opening game, but I do think that O&D's coming over from Texas A&M Corpus Christi helps out in terms of versatility as well. Valparaiso, a slightly up-tempo team, not super duper fast, not super duper slow, and I do think that Ketucky, after they were, for their standards, held down night number 1, I do think that the tempo is a little bit higher in this game. Semi-total 157.5. I like the over, but want to take the big giant number here with Valparaiso. 7-5, 7-6 on the card. Wake Forest is playing us at Morehead State. Morehead State is a sizable underdog here of 19.5 to 20.5 points. So on this game, it is 148.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on Morehead State. I just set my line at an 18.5. I just wasn't necessarily feeling what Wake Forest brought in the transfer portal. Last season for Wake Forest, they were outside the top 300 in terms of their three-point shooting percentage, and they do return a few pieces from that backcourt a season ago, and I think that Omaha Blue, a former top 50 recruit, is going to be able to take some strides forward in this Wake Forest system, but there's still a lot of question mark in terms of what this team is going to be able to get in terms of their outside shooting. But Kai Mason was able to put in their 20 points, 10 rebounds in their season debut win, and he's a guy that was able to shoot 40% from three-point range a season ago, so nice upside there. But I do think that for Wake Forest, they're going to be built a little bit more down low with Ballou along with Trevon Spillers, who is a nice rock-solid piece down low for this team. Drew Karras is a guy that had 18 points in that season opening game, and last season he was more of an ancillary piece that came out off the bench. 6 points, 3 boards, but again, another guy that shot about 30% from three-point range. And Morehead State, always a very slow and controlled team. Outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game 8 seasons ago. Now Morehead State is in quite a bit of transition. Last year they had Kenny White Jr. be really versatile for them, and Teron Morton, he's now over at Washington State, so they're going to be looking to Josiah Legree to really be taking over this offense. He was over at Indiana State 8 seasons ago, a guy that came in off the bench and had 2.5 assists in like 13.5 minutes per game, so he has shown that he's a really good ball handler. He had 8 assists in the team's season debut. George Marshall is someone that's going to need to step it up quite a bit as well. He's been in this system for the last few years. Last season as a bit of a sixth man, was able to give you 7.5 points per contest, but he again, another guy that really left something to be desired with his three-point shooting, and this is a Morehead State team that they were well outside the top 250 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but I do think that having a lot of size for a mid-major team, having someone like a 6'9" Tamai Relaford, who he began his career over at West Georgia, I think that he's going to be able to provide them a little bit of rough and tumble down low. John Carroll is someone that comes in from the non-D1 ranks. He was able to put in their 20 points in their season debut as well. I do think that for this Morehead State team, they're going to do just enough with regards to their defense to hold in this game. I do think that they're going to be controlling the tempo against a Wake Forest team that we have seen them in the beginning part of the C4 era. They were going a little bit more up-tempo, a little bit more offensive-oriented. Now it feels like a little bit more of a defensive team. So I set my total at a 142.5. I'm going to take a shot on the under end. At 19 plus, I'm going to be in on the points with Morehead State. 707, 708 on the card. Georgia State is on the road facing off against Cincinnati. Yes, we are on to Cincinnati, and they're on to being 26.5 point favorites. So on this game, it is 150.5, and I said Georgia State has a 17.5 point underdog. I'm willing to take the points. Now, I feel like maybe I just have a little bit too much affinity for the coach in Jonas Hayes after he was the man that actually was the interim coach for Xavier when they made that NIT run and they won the NIT title, the last one that was played out there in New York City. And I do look at this bunch and they bring back quite a few minutes from a season ago. Bringing back someone like a Jelani Hamilton, I think is massive. Last year at Georgia State as a freshman, he was putting in their 10.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. Bringing in someone like that, I think is absolutely tremendous for this team. You also have a guy in Micah Tucker who comes in as a freshman. He should be able to give this team a little bit of facilitation to help out Malachi Brown, who he's another guy that returns from the season ago. Brown was giving the team about 3.5 assists, 8 points per contest. I feel like the depth in the backcourt is a little bit better for a Georgia State team that is likely going to be looking to play a bit more up-tempo this season, considering they just don't have a lot of size. Outside of Trey Scott, who didn't see a lot of minutes in that season opening game, you really don't have someone above 6'8" for this team. So Cincinnati, they should be able to dominate down low, but Cincinnati is dealing with quite a few losses of their own. They were supposed to have Jizzle James be one of the main leaders in the backcourt. He got kicked off the team, and right now they are dealing with a pretty massive injury as Jalen Haynes, who came over from George Mason, was expected to be a big-time big man for the team. He's out of the fold. Now, the good news is you still have 7'2" Mustafa Thiem, who was able to average 2 blocks per contest over at Central Florida last year. He should be able to do a nice job of locking it down low, but you're relying upon Kirk Kriisa to make good decisions, and that's always a little bit of a roll of the dice. A man that has been very well traveled, coming off of a major injury that limited him to just 9 games over at Ketucky a season ago. A guy that's clearly able to facilitate across all of his stops. He's a career 4.5 assists per game guy, and has always been an okay three-point shooter at 36.5% from 3, but it just feels like sometimes he tries to make the too fancy of a play, and sometimes it's addition by subtraction with him, so they're going to need someone like a Sincere Harris to be able to help him out a little bit in the backcourt. And then Baba Miller, he's got really good versatility, comes on over after at Florida Atlantic last year, was shooting in the mid-30s from 3, 11 points, 7 boards, blocking out per contest at 6'11". So with this Cincinnati team, they should be able to win the battle down low, but again with Cincinnati, lots of question marks in terms of backcourt. I think that they're going to be relatively sloppy in terms of their offense. They did have 15 turnovers in that season opening game, and I think that keeps Georgia State lively in this game. I set my line at 17.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Georgia State, and I'm in on the under, set by total of 147.5. 709, 710 on the betting board. Western Illinois is on the road facing off against Iowa. Iowa is a 26-27-point favorite. 145-147 is your total, and made a total of 144.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under for Iowa. Very good 100-point performance to be able to begin the season over against Robert Morris. I don't quite think that they're going to be averaging 100 points per game. I do think that two things can be true with Ben McCollum's system. I do think that it's going to be relatively slow and controlled, much like we saw over at Drake last season. I also don't think that they're as slow as that. If you look at Ben McCollum when he was at the D2 ranks, a lot more mid-tempo teams, and he's always had really good offensive pieces with Alvaro Fogurius coming over for this squad. I think that is absolutely massive. Love what he was able to do at Robert Morris last year, where he was putting there 15 plus points, 9 boards, shot in the high 30s from 3, and he fits in so well with all the Drake guys that come on over with Ben McCollum, as you had an absolutely magnificent season from Bennett Sturts last season. He was putting in there 15 plus points per contest, gave you rebounds, facilitation 40% from 3-point range, and he made his presence very much felt. Night number 1, you've got a nice big man named Cam Maniwu, who last season was supplying the team with like 4.5, 5 rebounds per game. He fits like a glove with this system in the way that he's got active hands, helps out with being able to generate turnovers, and for Western Illinois, it is a team that's in quite a bit of transition, though. Western Illinois shot over 37% from 3-point range on the road last season. That was actually one of the best marks in all of college basketball. That said, they do lose quite a few of those backcourt pieces from a season ago. Someone like a Julius Rollins, who was giving them 9 points per contest. He's now out. You lose a guy that was putting in there over 16 points per contest, and Marco Melitic as well. So they're looking a little bit more to the low post presence of Isaiah Griffin. Griffin last season was over at Idaho St, a starter that supplied 10.5 points, 4 boards. He's able to shoot it from 3, but is a career less than 30% 3-point shooter. So you expect this team to be heading in a little bit of a different direction with regards to this offense, especially with bringing in Tyron Cook, who was over at Indiana State, was limited due to injury last season, 2 years ago at VMI, 12.5 points, 2.5 assists per contest. He's going to be able to help this team out with regards to that 3-point shooting as well. But that said, I do think that with regards to Western Illinois, even though they take a little bit of a step back with regards to their 3-point shooting, when this team was really able to exceed expectations 2 years ago, it was on the glass. They've added in there quite a few nice pieces, and I think that's going to be just enough for them to be able to stay within this number. I set my line at a 26.5. Right now I'm seeing a 27 out there on Iowa, and it's probably going to be going northward. I wouldn't be surprised if this closes above 28. So at a 27 plus, I'm going to be able to take the points with Western Illinois. So I told 144.5. So here at 145 plus, I'm in on the under. 7-11, 7-12 on the card. Cornell is on the road against Kent State. Kent State is a 4.5 to a 5.5 point favorite. Total on this game 163.5 to 164.5. Made a total of 154.5. I'm in on the under. Cornell, always a very up-tempo team. They were always ranking in the top 50 in terms of total possessions per game. And even though Cornell consistently finds themselves in terms of the top of all of college basketball, in terms of percentage of their shots that come from 3-point range, it actually really frees themselves up for 2-point looks. Cornell, over the last 3 seasons, has been a top 20 team in terms of their 2-point shooting percentage. So that's something that you do want to note. And you find that a lot with these teams that they go bombs away from 3-point range. Not only do they take a lot of threes, but that actually frees them up for a lot of good 2-point looks. And for Cornell, they are going to be in a little bit of transition. They lose some of those guys that were rock solid from a season ago, but bringing back Cooper Norwood along DJ Nix is a nice place to be able to start. With Norwood last season as a starter with 13 points per contest, he was able to shoot about 42% from 3-point range, so that's a great place to be able to start. And then with DJ Nix, he's just been a nice mixer and shaker for this team. Not necessarily a primary scorer, but last season he was able to give you like 3.5 points. He's a guy with size that's able to come in there, be a nice little bit of a defensive soccer. He's been a guy that's been glued to the bench over the last few seasons. I think that he takes some strides forward this season. Jake Fegan, he was a starter from a season ago that gave the team 11 points on 38.5% 3-point shooting, so that helps them out quite a bit. I think a little bit of the question that you've got for Cornell is, are they going to have a main trigger man from a season ago? Because last season, they were really trusting in A.K. Okereke along Nazir Williams to be the main guys in the backcourt for this team. When Nazir Williams, he exhausted all of his eligibility, and no longer do they have Okereke in the fold. So that means that they're going to be in a little bit of transition there. Guy Ragland was another guy that was able to give you 3 assists per contest. He's out of eligibility as well. So those guys that really had the ball in their hand quite a bit, they're out of the fold. Meanwhile, the guys that were off the ball that were really able to go bombs away from 3, they're back in, and they face off against a Kent State team that when they're at full force, they're always a top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, so that could be a little bit rough in this spot for Cornell. I did set my line here at a 4.5. Right now, we're seeing with this Kent State team who lost night number 1 to Troy in a very exciting game as more of a 5.5 point favorite, so I'd be willing to take a 5+ here with Cornell, just trusting in that system, even though they do lose those main ball handlers, mainly because with Kent State, they looked much better from 3-point range night number 1 in their Sun Belt Showdown, but that said, they were last year a team that was well outside the top 250 with regards to their overall 3-point shooting percentage, and I do think that Kent State is very much going to be looking to go a little bit more down low, and I know that Kent State was a upper half of college basketball team in terms of total possessions per game. I think that they might slow things down because their main guy is Dereko Gillespie, who had 22 points, 16 rebounds in that season opening game. Last season, he was putting in there 8 points and 8 rebounds per game, but if you look at what he did in conference play, he was averaging more like 9 rebounds per game. You do bring back a nice pass-first guard in Sion Medley. Never has been a guy that's really put the ball in the basket, but he's a guy that last year was able to give the team over 3.5 assists per contest. Morgan Safford, you have to believe, is going to be their main scorer, a guy that was limited to 8 games a season ago. Last we saw him out there for a full season, 2022-23 campaign at Miami of Ohio. 15.5 points per game on 35% 3-point shooting, and he had 21 points in that season debut as well, but I do think that for Kent State, having a lot of transition with regards to the ancillary scorers for the team, losing someone like a Sullinger out there in the backcourt, I think that that's going to be affecting them, and I do think that for Cornell, they actually get slowed down a little bit here. I do think that Kent State is going to be able to generate some turnovers, but that said, with this Kent State team, I think that they themselves are going to have a little bit of a tough time taking care of the ball. I think that in the end, Kent State does enough with their rebounding to get the job done outright on the money line, but I only set my line at 4.5. 5+, I'm going to be able to take the points with Cornell, and I'm in on the under, set my total 154.5. Sub 13, sub 14 on the card. It is Kansas. They are on the road against North Carolina. North Carolina is a team that opened up as a 1 to 1.5 point favorite. A lot of places still have them right around about a 1.5, and this total is anywhere between 155.5 to a 157.5. It opened up at a 152.5, so we're seeing a lot of movement there. I've got a total of 156.5 in terms of my handicap. A lot of places as I'm doing this between about 155.5, 156, and 156 is my absolute max buy point on the over, but I am going to be in on the over with North Carolina. As we know, under Hubert Davis, this is a team that likes to run. They are going to need to tighten up the defense. When they were the 1 seed in the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago, they were actually a top 50 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and I do think that they're going to be able to get back to those roots just a little bit more with North Carolina. You do have some question marks in the backcourt. You lose AJ Cadu from a season ago, but I really like the freshman that they were able to bring in. Caleb Wilson having 22 points night number 1 against Radford was a good sign. Seth Trimble was not necessarily amazing with regards to his 3-point shooting a season ago, but a guy that was able to be a nice scorer and a nice starter for the team a year ago, so I do think that there's significant upside with what he's going to be able to bring to the table. And then you've got Henry Vassar, a true 7-footer that I think is going to be able to help this team out defensively. Had a double-double night number 1. We saw how big he was for Arizona, and a guy with size that's able to pop it from 3. Jaron Stevenson, having his size, is going to be able to help out as well. And then for Kansas, Darren Peterson, great name. He's one of the best freshmen in all of college basketball. This guy is one of the more versatile pieces that you're going to find, and this Kansas team is back a little bit down low with Flory Badunga coming in after he last season gave the team like 6 points, 5.5 boards, block and a half per contest, so I do think that they're going to be pretty set in terms of low post presence. For Kansas, the big question is, what are you going to be able to get around Peterson in the backcourt, as they bring in a few guys from the mid-major ranks. Jaden Dawson, nice double-figure scorer over at Loyola Chicago. Melvin Council, do-it-all guy at St. Bonaventure at Wagner the last few seasons. And then Trey White has always been a solid player at USC and Illinois. Not necessarily a takeover guy, though, and for Kansas, they were able to take down UW Green Bay very convincingly. They only had 3 turnovers in that game. That was not much of a test whatsoever. That UW Green Bay team is not great whatsoever. And Bryson Tiller, I think, is going to be a nice upside guy as a freshman for this Kansas team as well. But in the end, I do think that with just having so much experience with the North Carolina backcourt, bringing over guys like Trimble and company, I think that's just enough for North Carolina to get the job done on their home floor. I think that home court advantage is going to be massive in this game. If this were a neutral court game, I probably would be setting Kansas as a little bit of a favorite. With this in Chapel Hill, I'm going to be willing to take a shot on North Carolina, made them a 2.5-point favorite, and I like 156 or less to the over semi-total at a 156.5. 7:15, 7:16 on the card. Ole Miss is playing also Louisiana Monroe. Monroe is a 32.5 to a 33.5-point dog. So on this game, it is 151.5, and with Monroe, I did set them as an underdog of 30.5 points. So here at 32 plus, I'm going to be willing to take a shot on those points with Louisiana Monroe. They underwent a coaching change really towards the back half of the season last year, because with Louisiana Monroe, they decided that they were going to be making the coaching change mid-season, and now they're in full year number 1 for Phil Cunningham, who he used to be the coach over at Troy, and he brought with him a few guys I think have some upside. Matavius Russell, he spent some time over at Mississippi State, could never really get out there on the floor, but was a pretty highly touted guy. Christian Lewis, night number 1 for this team, was able to put in there 22 points, 5 assists. It looks like he's going to be a bona fide nice player for the team after he comes on over after having a nice year at the non-Division I ranks. This is a team that's lacking a lot of size. You're probably going to be relying upon Presmik Hartman, who is a true freshman that comes on over from the country of Poland, and this team has quite a few international men of mystery. Alex Malafi, hopefully I got that correct, comes on over from Russia. Alex Hugo Carrasco was from Spain, so they really went the international route to try to be able to retool this roster, and they've got a lot of guys that are out of sight, out of mind, going against a Ole Miss team that they've got guys that are in sight, and they've got guys that we have all heard of before. With Ole Miss, as we know under Chris Beard, they always like to have a lot of versatility in positionless basketball. Bringing back Malik Dia from a season ago is big. Began his career at Belmont. He had 20 points, night number 1 at 6'9". He's able to give you some nice versatility, and Ketucky was able to tear it up in the Big South. He came in off the bench for 12 points, night number 1. That's why he's been an okay 3-point shooter. Not as a guy that's absolutely going to just shoot the cover off the ball or anything like that, but he's a guy that I really like what he's able to bring to the table. I think that he's going to be a good fit along with the likes of James Scott and Corey Chess, who should be able to win the battle down low in this one. Louisiana Monroe is going to be lacking a lot of size, but you just don't know what you're going to get out of AJ Soar. Nice number 1 performance was nice, 18 points, 6 boards, and when he was over at Wisconsin, he was their top scorer 2 seasons ago. Just did not pan out for him last year at Kansas. I think it's somewhere between A and B. I don't think he gets back to peak Wisconsin form. I also don't think that he's as bad as he was over at Kansas last season. And then Corin Johnson was dealt with injury over the last few seasons. What are you going to be able to get out of him? So I do think that Ole Miss is going to be able to win this game convincingly, but we saw them go deep into their bench night number 1 as well. I think that there's going to be a lot of experimentation, and I think that provides enough runway for Louisiana Monroe to be able to get the cover. I did set my total at a 142.5. Ole Miss typically a bit more of a defense-oriented team under Chris Beard, so like the under and the points here with Monroe. 7-17, 7-18 on the board. It is UMKC on the road against Southern Illinois. Southern Illinois, a 13 to a 13.5 point favor. 144.5 is the total. I set my line at 7.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with UMKC. With UMKC, they were outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game last season, and this Marvin Menzies style just does not really allow you to be able to excel on offense, but typically this is a team that does a rock-solid job on defense. Now, they did score 80 points, say, number 1 in their game against a non-D1 team, and they actually got tested in that one, but I actually like the addition of Jerome Palm. I always felt like he should have been getting more minutes over at Valparaiso, a good rebounder that really doesn't have a lot of an offensive game, so he fits perfectly with this style. They bring back Jason Petty from a season ago. Petty was flying the team with about 11 points, never has been a great 3-point shooter, but is able to give you about 4.5 boards per contest, and that's a lot of what you could expect from this UMKC team. You have to think that Jariah Evans, who comes over from the non-D1 ranks, is going to be a little bit more of that primary ball handler. He had 5 assists in that night number 1 game, and then they're going to be looking at Adrian Scott, who is a guy that has been around the block, playing a lot at the non-Division I level, actually was at Auburn a few seasons ago. He's going to be looking to be able to provide a little bit of upside as well. And then on the flip side, you got a bunch I just don't think should be a double-figure favorite in Southern Illinois. They do lose their top scorer from a season ago, and Ali Deba. He transferred on over to Texas A&M late in the process. And Scott Nagy is a rock-solid coach, but he's now going to be looking to Kuleron House, who is a solid player over at Jacksonville State a season ago, where he was averaging about 8.5 points per contest, shot 35.5% from three. A little bit of a do-it-all guy to really be stepping up. I do think that for Southern Illinois, they're going to look to crank up their tempo after they were more of a mid-tempo team a season ago, and Jalen Haynes was a nice find as a freshman. He had 8 points, number one for the team, but they're going to be relying upon Davion Sykes to be able to take a little bit of a stride forward. Began his career at Texas State last year, was a solid off-the-bench player for the team with 5 points, 3.5 boards, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. Has been working on that three-point shot after he didn't necessarily have that in the beginning part of his career. And Prince Alajibi, who began his career at Boston College at Seton, should be able to give the team a little bit of something down low, but he's been undersized at 6'6". And Isaiah Stafford, he was a good scorer 2 seasons ago over at Valparaiso, missed all of last season due to injury. What are you going to be able to get out of him? First start out there for Southern Illinois, only about 5 points. So I do have some question marks with regards to a Southern Illinois team that took some chances on some guys that were banged up last season. I do think the UMKC does a nice job of being able to slow this game down. Semi-total 137.5. I like the points here with UMKC to go along with that total under. 719, 720 on the card. It is Missouri playing us to Southeast Missouri State. Southeast Missouri State is a 23.5 point underdog. 156.5 to 157 is the total. And with SEMO, I did set them as an underdog of 22.5 points. So here at 23 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points with Southeast Missouri State. A not so great start to the season up against St. Louis, but I do think that SEMO is going to be able to bounce back. Having BJ Ward back from a season ago was able to give the team 9 points per contest. That's big. Now, losing Teddy Washington in the offseason was big. He was a little bit of a heart and soul piece and a big reason why Southeast Missouri State was able to have the success that they did a season ago, but I thought that they did a nice job mixing and matching to be able to replace him. Now, Southeast Missouri State is very much undersized in comparison to Missouri. Missouri is a much bigger team than what we've seen in past years. Sean Phillips, he's a guy that stands truly 7 feet tall, comes over after he was over at Arizona State the last few seasons. He's a highly touted guy. Jacob Cruz is a 6'7", 6'8", a little bit of a combo player that is able to pop it from three. He had 10 points in that season opening game, but I do sense Missouri going in a little bit of a different direction than they have in past seasons. They did have 16 turnovers in that season number 1 game, and you got Anthony Robinson and Sebastian Mack as true guards, but pretty much everyone else is like a bunch of wings, a lot of guys that don't necessarily take care of the ball. You've got someone like Javon Porter, who stands 6'11", had good versatility when he was over at Loyola Marymount, along with Pepperdine out there in the WCC, and he's actually of relation to the other Porter, Michael Porter, who used to play for Missouri as well. But this is a Missouri team that I think is going to be slowed down a little bit by just the overall size that they've got. They were able to take it to Howard 88 to 67, which that's a big score right there, but Howard is always a relatively rough defensive team, to say the least, and I do think that for Southeast Missouri State, even though they're going to lose the battle on the glass, I do think that their backcourt is going to be able to do just enough to be able to keep them lively in this game. And again, I do think that with Missouri, they are going to have a little bit of a tougher time taking care of the ball than they have in past seasons. I think that they're asking a lot of Mack and Robinson in the backcourt. So I just set my line at 22.5. SEMO, a relatively solid team at generating turnovers a season ago. So I'm in on the under to go along with points with Southeast Missouri State. 721, 722 on the card. Utah State is on the road against VCU. Well, technically it's a neutral court game, as this is Utah State as a 2.5 to a 3.5 point favorite. 159.5 is the total. And with Utah State, I did make them a 4.5 point favorite. I am going to be willing to lay up to 3.5 with them for Utah State. They do bring back some of those nice pieces from a season ago. Obviously, they're going to be in a little bit of transition with the backcourt, but you also have a VCU team that they're in quite a bit of transition, as well as Utah State for a change. They didn't have to change their coach in the offseason, so they're able to stick with the same Calhoun system, which I do like that. And for Utah State, having MJ Collins come in was absolutely massive. He had 23 points in that season debut game, as he at Vanderbilt last season was a really nice off-the-bench scorer who was able to spy 7.5 points per contest. Has never really been an amazing three-point shooter, but having a guy like a Kobe King, who was a solid scorer over at Tulane, is solid. And then you're able to pair that up with Carson Templin along with Mason Fosloff, who are back from a season ago. Fosloff, a nice scorer, guy that's able to give you a few assists per contest. He and Drake Allen, I think, are going to be a really nice combo in the backcourt. And then Tucker Anderson, he's a very versatile piece that was coming in off the bench for Utah State last season 2 years ago when he was the star player over at Central Arkansas. Shot 38% from three, 14.5 points at 6'9". So that versatility I think is absolutely massive for this unit. And on the other end, we've got a VCU team that they bring over a few guys along with Phil Martelli Jr. from what was a very good Bryant team, and that is going to be key for a little bit of early season chemistry. You have to expect some good things moving forward out of the likes of a Barry Evans, who was a nice double-figure scorer over at Bryant, but they're going to be probably looking to allow Jadian Tracy, who is averaging about 7 points per contest over at Oregon a season ago. Brandon Jennings, Terrence Hill are going to be sort of the main ball handlers for the season, and Nick Lewis, who is a freshman that was a top 75 guy, he had 5 assists in that season opening game as well. So there's going to be a lot of good guard play with this team. I do have to have my question marks with what you're going to get down low. Lazar Djokovic, he's stands 6'11", comes on over from College of Charleston. He's probably going to be their main guy down low, and he does have some versatility to be able to shoot it from three. Has never really shot well from three, but someone that's able to shoot it from three. But I do think that Utah State is going to be able to win that battle down low. Templin was a guy that always struggled at the free throw line, but was a guy that was able to lock things down low. And I do think that with Utah State, they're going to do a nice job with regards to more of a mid-tempo style with them. They're not necessarily super duper fast. They're not necessarily super duper slow. Utah State had their defense really humming towards the beginning part of the year last year, and then it sort of fell off the table in Mountain West play. But I do think that for VCU, with a lot of transition for them, and this is going to be a game that's going to be, in my opinion, a little bit more favorable for Utah State as well. This is being played out there in Frisco, Texas. I do think that Utah State finds a way to get it done. I'm willing to lay up to 4 with Utah State. Semi-total 152.5. I do think that the neutral court game is going to affect the shooting a little bit, so in on the under. 723, 724. On the card, you've got SIU State on the road against Texas Tech. Texas Tech is finding themselves as a good size favorite here. You're going to be laying anywhere between 27.5 to 28.5 points with them. 152.5 is the total, and for Texas Tech, I did set them as a favorite of 25.5 points. I'm going to be willing to take the points with SIU State. SIU State was just absolutely abysmal against the spread last season, so we'll see if they're in for a little bit of a bounce back this year, and I do think that they're going to be a skoge a bit better for SIU State. I do think that Chris Mudge is going to be able to do a nice job getting things back online, and Damian Nichols is a nice piece to be able to build around. He has spent all of his years over at SIU State as a starter last year, about 8 points, 5.5 rebounds, shot 37% from three-point range, and this was a SIU State team that was a top 50 team with regards to their three-point shooting last season. Po Boy King, who was a really nice player over at NC Central, was a 12-plus point per game scorer, comes in. He should be able to give this team a little bit of facilitation, and this team is gambling on Isaiah Manning coming on over from TCU, where he just wasn't able to see a lot of minutes. That's a little bit of a 6'8" wing, and they're relying upon him to be able to blossom. He night number one was able to give the team 11 points, so some nice upside there. You got Vajelo Illich, who comes on over from Loyola, Maryland. He should be able to give this team a little bit of size down low, and that's a little bit of a fear that you've got with the SIU State team. They might have a bit of a tough time down low. You did have Kashai Knott give you 11 rebounds night number one, but at 6'3", I don't think that that's necessarily going to be too reliable. And for Texas Tech, I mean, when JT Toppin is out there on the floor, he's going to be an absolute dominator. He actually missed the season opening game for this squad. You have to wonder when he's going to be out there. They were also missing LaJuan Watts, but Watts was dealing with a little bit of injury when he was over at Washington State last season, so that one was a little bit less of a surprise. But I said, even without him, this was a Texas Tech team that was able to go out there and they were able to dominate in their first game of the season. Donovan Atwell, who comes over after he spent some time at the SoCon level, he was able to put in their 22 points night number one. And Christian Anderson was a nice piece for this Texas Tech team a season ago when they made their run to the Elite Eight. Was able coming off the bench, average 10.5 points, shot 38% from three, 34 points, 11 assists in that first game. He is going to have the keys to the car, and I think that he's going to do a good job of driving it right to a big season. Then Jalen Petty, he's a under-the-radar freshman that should be able to come in, give this team some nice production right away. You've got a lot of good three-point shooting with the likes of Tyree Bryan and company, and SIU State was a unit that was outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis a season ago. I think that they're going to be a little bit improved on the defensive side of things. And for Texas Tech, under Graham McCaslin, I do think that this is going to be a little bit more of a controlled team as well. They are certainly playing a little bit faster than McCaslin did when he was over at North Texas, but I think with SIU State, this is going to be a squad that does just enough to be able to hold in there, and I do think that with Texas Tech, with JT Toppin dealing with injury or what have you, as he wasn't out there night number one, that does take a little bit away from them, and that allows SIU State to be able to hang within the numbers. So we'll take those points with SIU State. I'm also in on this total under as well, as I did set my total more of a 143.5. 725, 726 on the cards. Southern Indiana, they are going to be playing us a VMI. VMI is a road favorite of 1 to 2 points, and your total is between 152 to a 153. And I did set Southern Indiana as 5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take them outright on the money lines at underdog for VMI. They do return quite a few guys from a season ago. Tanyezaglu was able to give you 4.5 assists per contest. That's going to be able to help them out quite a bit, but Ricky Bradley did not play in that season opening game for VMI. That was a little bit unexpected. He was averaging 16 plus points per game for the team. There is no way of knowing whether or not he's going to be in for this game, and I'm assuming that he's going to play because they were playing against a non-Division I team. A lot of times you'll see guys sit in terms of that, but that tells me that something might not be right with him, and that does have to give you a little bit of pause. Now, you have to have some pause with this Southern Indiana team as well. They were unable to get to 60 points against Butler. They shot in that game only 29.2% from the floor. I think that goes northward. They face off against a VMI team that has been outside the top 265 in terms of opponents' field goal shooting percentage each out of the last 3 seasons, and it is a new-look Southern Indiana backcourt, but I do think that Ismail Habib, who he was the main facilitator over at Portland State 2 seasons ago, he's going to be able to find his footing with this offense. Trey Thomas was a 15-plus point per game scorer over at Bethune-Cookman. He had 11 points at number 1. He's going to be able to find it as well, and I do think that for the Screaming Eagles, they do a nice job of being able to win this battle down low. You've got someone in Tolu Samuels, who's a 6'8" gentleman that comes in from the non-D1 ranks. He had 6 rebounds, 4 assists, night number 1. He's got some good versatility for the team, and they're really going to be featuring a lot of Caden Brown, who comes in from Wright State, where last season he just wasn't able to get out there on the floor for him, but that said, he had 13 points in that season opening game against Butler. It is a Southern Indiana team that last year was a top 125 team in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Not a team that's really going to generate a lot of turnovers or get up in your grill, though they did have 8 steals against Butler in that season opening game, but I do think that Southern Indiana, they find a little bit more footing with their offense, and they find a way to persevere against a VMI team that I think it's going to be interesting in terms of the tempo that they play. As for VMI, it's been a little bit of a slow build for them. They've had a lot of just transitionary period in general. Last year, they were a little bit more of a mid-tempo team, and I do think that for Southern Indiana, they take a little bit of a setback in terms of that three-point shooting from a season ago, so did set a total of a 149. I do like the under to go along Southern Indiana on the money line. 727, 728 on the card. Wisconsin is playing us in Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois, very big-time underdogs here. You're going to be finding them between 27 to 27.5 point dogs. 156 to 157 is the total. I set a total of a 143.5. I'm in on the under. Now, I recognize that Wisconsin is playing at a much higher tempo than they did just 2 short years ago. That said, Wisconsin last year was right around about 165th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and if you look at that night number 1 matchup that they had against Campbell, they were in like a 5 or so point game with 8 minutes remaining. They were up, I think it was 67 to 62 with about 8 minutes and change remaining, and then from there they just were able to play at warp speed, and then they went on some like 27 to 2 run to end the game. You have to think that John Blackwell is going to have a massive season. He last year was able to get the team double figures. He had 28 plus points in that season opening game against Campbell. Nolan Winter is a true 7-footer that gives the team nice versatility, and Wisconsin's going to knock down their free throws. They were number 1 in all of college basketball in terms of free throw shooting percentage, top 25 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. I just don't know if Northern Illinois is going to do their part with this total, and I would not be surprised if Northern Illinois tries to really slow this game down. For Northern Illinois, they just were unable to grab offensive rebounds last season. Last season, 14.5% of their missed shots resulted in an offensive rebound. That was dead last in all of college basketball, so they were only able to get 1 attempt and 1 attempt only for this Northern Illinois bunch last year. They were about 49th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and they lose much of that backcourt from a season ago, which leads me to believe that they are going to be trying to grind things down a little bit more. I do think that they're going to look to be a little bit better in the post. You saw night number 1 in their season debut matchup that they were able to do quite a bit of a better job on the glass. I do think that that's going to help them be just pesky enough to be able to hold within the summer. I set my line at 25.5. I'm going to be wanting to take the points with Northern Illinois bringing in Jai Otika. I still remember it was like 4 years ago when he was over at Marist. He was averaging 13 points per contest, shot 40% from 3. That's a big gift for them. And then you've got Gianni Cobb. Gianni Cobb had 10 assists in that first game for Northern Illinois. He comes on over from Columbia, where he was a guy that was able to get out there on the floor a little bit, was generating a steal, 4.5 points per contest as a little bit more of an ancillary piece, but I do think that this team did a nice job in terms of being able to revamp things when Northern Illinois was actually rock solid down low. They had 2 seasons ago, Yannick Conan Niederhauser doing a nice job of being able to provide shot blocks down low. They don't necessarily have a guy like that, but Gustav Winther, who comes over from the country of Denmark, he was able to provide a double-double in that first game. 18 points, 10 rebounds. There's reason to be encouraged with what you're able to find from Northern Illinois down low. I think that they're going to be looking to slow things down a little bit now. They put up a massive 1 or 2 spot on Louisiana Monroe, night number 1, they shot 11 of 27 from three-point range. I don't think that Lightning is going to be striking twice. And for Northern Illinois, they do face off against a Wisconsin team that they're still relatively rock solid with their defense. Wisconsin, they gave it up a little bit more than what you'd like from three-point range seasons ago. I think that they're going to be much better with regards to that perimeter defense. And I do think that Northern Illinois going to be struggling with the overall versatility of this Wisconsin team. But I do think that in the end, the revamped backcourt is going to be just enough for Northern Illinois to hold in there. And I do think that things go a little bit more slowly than we saw night number 1 on Northern Illinois. So I did set a total of a 143.5. I'm in on the under, and at 26 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points with Northern Illinois. 729, 730 on the card. It is UAB. They're on the road against NC State, and NC State finds themselves as a double-figure favorite here of 15.5 points. So on this game, it is 162.5, and made a total of 153.5. I'm in on the under. UAB looked very solid on defense, number 1 against Mississippi Valley State. I'm not going to put too much into that because it's Mississippi Valley State, but for UAB, even though they are without Yaxel Lundeborg from a season ago, you do lose a nice three-point shooter in Jabari McGee. I do think that this is going to be a team that holds in there. I set my line at 11.5. I just trust in Coach Andy Kennedy. He's always done less with more, and with UAB, they are clearly in quite a bit of transition from a season ago. They're really going to be relying upon Chance Westery, who began his career over at Syracuse, a former top 75 recruit that has just not been able to find it, but I have reason to believe that they might slow things down just a little bit, bringing in Daniel Rivera along Kyron Lindsey Martin, who these are two guys I think are going to be nice down low. Rivera, not necessarily a guy that's going to bomb it from three, began his career at Bryant and UMass, but a guy that he's able to give you about 7.5, 8 rebounds per game at 6'7". He, over his 2 seasons, has been able to provide nearly 2 blocks per contest. And then Kyron Lindsey was actually the top rebounder over at Georgia during the first half of the 2022-23 season before he just decided to abruptly leave the program. I'm not sure why, and they're very much going to be basing things around Jacob Meyer, who was a solid guard over at DePaul last season, and Ahmad Robinson, who was a starter over at Mercer, averaged 17 points, 5 assists, 5 boards, a nice do-it-all stat sheet suffer, but not necessarily a guy that's going to launch it from three-point range. You have to have some question marks with the UAB three-point shooting, and for NC State, they were able to put up a big, massive number, number 1 on NC Central, but you may recall, if you look at what McNeese was able to do under Will Wade a season ago, they were actually outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game, and I think that they're going to be a little bit more explosive than that when you bring in a guy like a Trey Holloman, who's averaging 4+ assists per contest over at Michigan State a season ago. You also had in there a guy that I absolutely love, in Darion Williams. He was such a big part of that Texas Tech Elite 8 run a season ago. That's massive. And then you've got Jerry Dang and Ben Allen Lubin. They're a part of teams that were able to play relatively up-tempo last season. Dang was playing for Florida State last year. Ben Allen Lubin was over at North Carolina. So both of these guys are bigger men that are able to play in a little bit of a up-tempo style. But Kadir Copeland at 6'6" last season, he was averaging 4 assists, some solid scoring. When he was over at McNeese, he's going to be a nice Swiss Army knife sort of guy. And Terrence Arsenault, only 10 minutes, number 1 for NC State. You can tell that with Will Wade, he's sort of trying to find his footing with the team, and I do think that with UAB, they're going to be a little bit improved on defense, and that holds them in this game. I set my total out of 153.5. I like the under and the points here with the Blazers. 731, 732 on the card. Youngstown State is on the road against Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon, a double-figure favorite. You're going to be laying 13.5 to 12.5 points with them. 152 is the total, and set a total of 155.5. I'm going to be in on the over with Youngstown State. They are a bunch that was a top 100 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis last season, but much of that was because they had Gabe Dines, who was a top 5 shot blocker in all of college basketball at over 7 feet tall. Youngstown State was playing at a pretty good pace last year, 77th in terms of total possessions per game, and Grand Canyon was 19th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Now, that came with Grand Canyon also being a top 30 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, so do not get it twisted. This is a very rock-solid team on the defensive side of things, but that said, I do think that for Grand Canyon, they find a way to be able to get the job done against a Youngstown State team that they are in quite a bit of transition from a season ago. With Youngstown State, this was a unit that was really based around their low post play and being able to win the battle down low. Now they're going to be looking at Chris Carroll, who was one of their main holdovers from a season ago, to really take over things. 9 points, shot about 36% from three-point range last season. I really like what he's able to bring to the table, but no longer do you have that rough and tumble down low. Jason Nelson has been around the block over at Richmond, VCU, and has always been an okay scorer. He had 15 points, number 1, but not a guy that's going to light you up from 3. It feels like he should be a primary ball handler, but doesn't really give out a lot of assists, so a little bit strange there. And then Bryson Dawkins, he had a big season over at Houston Christian, just 2 points in that season opening game. We'll see if he's able to duplicate the 14.5 points per contest that he had a season ago, but I do think that they're running into a little bit of a buzzsaw with Grand Canyon, who they were able to absolutely dispatch. Purdue, Fort Wayne, night number 1. I love what Nana Wusu-Nane is able to give you, as he 2 seasons ago over at Brown was averaging like 15 plus points, 9 plus rebounds per game, a block, a steal per game. He does a little bit of everything. Missed all of last year due to injury, and now he comes in. He and William Breitenbach should be able to completely take things over down low. Dusty Stromer, he's always been a solid 3-point shooter, just never really found necessarily his footing over at Gonzaga. It looks like they're going to have him having quite a bit of a role with regards to handling the ball in this system. Mekhi Williams is someone that comes over after he was able to do some very nice things over at UT Arlington 2 seasons ago. Last year was a part-time starter for this Grand Canyon team, so he knows the system. He was giving the team about 2.5 assists per game. I think that he's going to be able to take quite a bit of the load off of Dusty Stromer, help him be able to find good looks from 3. And then Brian Moore Jr., I do think that this guy is going to give you more. After he had Norfolk State last season, averaged 18 points per game, shot in the high 30s from 3, was able to give out a few assists as well. Grand Canyon, I think they need to figure out who that main point guard is going to be, but that said, this is a very locked and loaded team that should be able to completely dominate down low, and for Youngstown State, I just don't think that defense is going to be what it was a season ago. So I did set a total of a 155.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the over, and with Grand Canyon, willing to lay up to 15 with them. 733, 734 on the betting board. It is Utah Tech. They're on the road facing off against Arizona. Arizona is a favorite of 28.5 points. So on this game, it is 162.5, and set a total of 159.5. I do like the under. With Utah Tech, I just flat out don't know if they do their part with this total. Utah Tech consistently outside the top 250 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Nice triumph for them, night number 1, being able to take down South Dakota, a game where both teams got past 75 points, and Utah Tech is typically a team that likes to fly. They're a top 75 team in terms of total possessions per game, but even though you did see Arizona give up 85 plus against Florida, that's against a Florida team that was one of the best teams in all of college basketball last season, the defending national champs. That's a little bit forgivable, and I do think that the screws are going to be tightened up a little bit more here, facing off against a Utah Tech team that typically they rely upon good 3-point shooting to be able to generate their offense, and for Utah Tech, it's going to be all about Ethan Potter, who comes on over from Utah Valley. In the first 2 games, this involves a game against a non-D1 team, 38 points there, so you'll love to be able to see that, but they just don't have the same 3-point shooting that they've had in seasons past. Noah Belonga, he comes on over after he was over at St. Bonaventure, glued to them for them 8 seasons ago. He's going to be a rock-solid guard, but not necessarily a guy that launches from 3. Jashawn Holt is a career 30% 3-point shooter. He began his career at Alabama and Georgia. He's got some high major experience. Was an okay player over at Kennesaw State last season, but he was dealing with a little bit of injury. He just don't have a lot of 3-point shooting with his team, and even though Potter is a nice little post presence, he's just not going to hold a candle to what you're able to get out of this Arizona team as Koa Pete. I mean, man, this guy was absolutely amazing night number 1 with 30 points, and then you've got Ivan Kurvachikov, hopefully I got that correct. He was able to give the team a nice double-double. The international men of mystery look great for Arizona, and I think that's addition by subtraction. The fact that you no longer have Caleb Love out there, as Jaden Bradley has never necessarily been an amazing 3-point shooter, but he's got around him a lot of nice weapons. And a guy in Anthony De La Rosa, who shot 40% from 3 last season, he's going to be able to help this team out. It's going to be an Arizona team that's probably not going to launch a ton from 3-point range, but you've got so many guys like Montevideo Krivas, Toby Awaka, who should be able to control things down low. For Utah Tech, I think that they're going to get absolutely blasted on the glass. I do think that Arizona is going to be able to generate some nice turnovers in this game as well against a Utah Tech team that it's very clear that they don't have necessarily a primary point guard at this spot. And I think that Arizona is one of the best teams in all of college basketball. I think that they put up there a big number against Utah Tech and hold down this Utah Tech team that is very much based around 3-point shooting in the past. As I did set my line at a 33.5, I'm willing to lay with Arizona, and on the under, set my total 159.5. 735, 736 on the card. San Diego is playing us at Idaho St. Idaho State is a underdog of 6 to 7 points. So on this game, it is 153.5. Made a total of a 145. I do like this total under. Now for Idaho State, they do lose quite a bit of what made them so good on the glass last year. Idaho State was actually a top 25 team with regards to rebound percentage last season, but that said, this is an Idaho State team that's not necessarily going to be looking to gun it or anything like that. 270th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. San Diego, it's very clear that they used some NIL benefits to be able to revamp this team. San Diego under Steve Lavin has actually been a very up-tempo team, top 45 team in terms of total possessions per game each of the last 2 seasons. It really didn't translate to a lot of scoring last season. Last season, the team was well outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but I think that they are probably going to be playing a little bit more slowly than they have in past years, but I do think that the overall efficiency is going to be much better with this San Diego team as well. For San Diego, they played against a non-D1 team to begin the season, gave up just 59 points there, and they're going to be looking to the Georgia State transfer into Nari Lane, who was able to put in their double figures 8 seasons ago to really get this offense rocking and rolling, but bringing in a guy like a Tyler Johnson, Johnson, who began his career at Louisville and Wake Forest, is big, and he was starting a lot of games over at Wake Forest 6 seasons ago. Not a great three-point shooter, but a guy that was in his 2 seasons in the ACC giving out about 3.5 assists per contest, so he's able to flow some good, clean offense. Now the question is, who are going to be the three-point shooters that take a little bit of the load off of him? You have to think that Juan Gordecito, who he last season was over at Ball State, gave the team 9 points per contest. That's actually a little bit of familiarity with the WCC. He was over at Portland, and he was shooting 40% from 3 in the MAC last season. He's going to be the primary guy. And then you bring in Tim Moore Jr., who I thought that this was a nice shrewd add in the transfer portal in the offseason at NJIT. He was averaging 13 points, 6.5 boards, shot about 36.5% from 3 at 6'6". So I do think that San Diego, they're going to be looking to scale things down a little bit. They've brought in some guys that were at more mid-tempo system schools, and I do think that's going to work out well. But for Idaho State, I did set them as a 7-point dog, so I would be willing to lay up to 6 with San Diego. But I do think that they'll have a little bit of success slowing down this game. They do return Connor Hellbuck. He was really the main other top 5 scorers that returns from each season ago last season. 8.5 points, 4 boards, rock solid down line. Did shoot 40% from 3-point range at 6'7". Now the changing of the guard after they last season had some really good facilitation with Dylan Darling. That's going to be big for the team, and I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a sloppier team on offense. But Quinn Patterson, I think, offers some upside after he was over at UC San Diego the last few seasons. Really couldn't get out there on the floor, but had 18 points in their first game of the season, and I think that he's going to be able to provide a little bit of spark, and then you're looking at Lachlan Brewer to really be able to take things over after he last season was a starter at Sacramento State. More of an off-the-ball guy, 6 points, 3 boards, shot 44.5% from 3-point range, but he is going to be able to give this team a little bit of rebounding as well. I do think that Idaho State going to be staying true to their solar style, especially with them trying to figure out who that main point guard is going to be. Gus Eschison is probably going to have the ball in his hands quite a little bit as well, but that said, I do think that with Evan Otten coming back down low at Idaho State, they're going to be able to hold in there on the glass. That said, I think that San Diego just brought in too much talent to not cover this game. I set my line at 7, one lay up to 6.5 with San Diego, and like the under, set my total 145. 737, 738 on the card. Oregon State plays host to Illinois Chicago. UIC It's a pretty slim-sized underdog here. You're going to be finding them as an underdog of 2.5 points total this game, between 148.5 to a 149.5, and with Oregon State, I'm going to be willing to lay with them. I did set them as a favorite of 8 points with Oregon State. They are in quite a bit of transition from last year, where they had so many good, versatile three-point shooters, having to replace the likes of Michael Rota and company. DeMarco Minor was able to become a major for the team. That is a little bit of transition, but for one, you do have a team from the great state of Illinois having to travel out there to Corvallis, Oregon, which I used to work for the official flagship station of the Oregon Ducks. I know how rough of travel that's going to be for UIC. And for 2 with Oregon State, I actually likewise saw from them in North Dakota State in that win, 67-65. It was a little bit of a tight one, but Isaiah C., who's one of the main guys that returns from a season ago, was a guy that came in off the bench, provided about 5.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range at 6'7". He still gives his team some relatively good versatility. Des White is most likely going to be the main ball handler for this team. He was a starter over at Austin Peay and also Missouri State last 2 seasons. Last year over at Missouri State was able to give out a few dimes. Has always been a pretty solid 3-point shooter, so I like what he's able to bring to the table. And then additionally, I do think that Josiah Lake, one of the main holdovers from a season ago, is going to be solid. And they added some nice size with Noah Ammenhauser, a true 7-footer who was able to pull in there for Coastal Carolina, 5+ rebounds per game. Yak. He comes in from after he was a international man of mystery, if I'm not mistaken. He should be able to give you a bit of something as well. I believe that he's a non-Division I transfer, and Ore Diaz-Graham coming over from Pittsburgh. That adds a lot of size as well against a UIC team that Sasa Sani was their main rebounder from the season ago, having him out of the fold. That hurts, as they're going to be looking to Sam Silverstein, who began his career over at Cal Baptist, to really hold things down low. Now, it's a rock-solid backcourt. Abad Henderson is back after he gave the team double figures. You're bringing a guy in Elijah Crawford, who began his career at BYU, was really unable to get out there on the floor, but highly touted guy. Lots of upside with him. And Mekhi Lowry is someone that has always been able to put in there some consistent production, was over at Towson last 2 seasons, and last year it was more of an ancillary role, just did a bit of this and that at 6'7", 5.5 points, 5 boards. Not a guy that's going to light you up from 3, but does a good job with regards to shot blocking. And UIC was a really good road 3-point shooting defense last year. They were a top 50 team with regards to opponents' 3-point shooting percentage on the road, but how they're going to be able to utilize Ante Belijan, who comes in from Little Rock Rock and Abdul Mamoa after they saw limited minutes and really didn't contribute a lot. Offensively, it's going to be a bit of a question mark. It is an Oregon State team that was relatively low tempo last year. They were outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game. Losing all that three-point shooting leads me to believe that they are going to be a little bit more of a controlled team. Like I said, with UIC, good three-point shooting defense from a season ago, but I do think that Oregon State having all that size and just the overall versatility is going to be enough for them on their own floor with a lot of travel for UIC to be able to get the job done. I did set my line at an 8, so I'm going to be willing to lay with Oregon State, and like the under, set my total 144, 739, 740 on the card. Oregon, they play us a Rice. We give our to Lane Kiffin, go Owls, as the Rice Owls are a 16.5 point underdog, 147.5 to 148.5 is the total, and for Oregon, made them a favorite of 17 points. I'm going to be willing to lay it against Hawaii for Oregon in that season debut. I mean, they were up 16 points in that game midway through the second half. Really looked like they were going to be able to run and hide with that game, and then from there, things toilet bowled a little bit. They're dealing with an injury to Jackson Shellside, so that does make the backcourt a little bit more questionable, but the front court should be very rock solid. You've got Nate Biddleback, who was averaging 15 points, 7 boards, and was able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range as well. That's something that I just don't think that Rice has an answer for, and for Rice, I actually do think that Coach Lanier is a very solid coach. He was over at SMU, and he got fired after a 20-win season, mainly because for SMU, they just got more resources, and they were looking to take some strides forward. That said, for Rice, you do have to have a lot of question mark in terms of what you're going to be able to get in terms of the outside shooting. They look good night number 1, and they bring in a guy in Dallas Hobbs, who I like. He was a starter player over at Mount St. Mary's the last few seasons, was averaging 12.5 points, 3.5 assists per contest, but not a guy that could really light you up from three-point range. Jalen Smith is probably going to be a big part of this team. He was a nice piece over at SMU 2 seasons ago under the tutelage of Mr. Lanier. Just wasn't able to get out there on the floor last year due to injury. He's always been a career about 36% three-point shooter at 6'4". Not necessarily a primary ball handler, but Trey Bordeaux, he's back after a season ago. He was able to give the team some good production. What are you going to be able to get out of him? Andrew Cucci, he's a nice rebounder as well, but it feels like Rice, they're really going to be trying to make their bones down low, and I think that that's going to help them out a little bit, but I just don't think that there's anyone on this team that's able to cover Nate Biddle, and for Oregon, even though they're going to be looking for some answers in the interim with not having out there on the floor Mr. Jackson Shellside, I do think that they are going to be able to get some relatively good production out of someone like a Takai Simpkins. Simpkins comes over after he was over at Elon last season, able to put in their 16.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. Maybe you don't want him as your main facilitator for the entirety of the season, but I do think that he's going to take the load off of so many of these guys, that there's going to be some big boy basketball being played for Oregon. The likes of Sean Stewart, KJ Evans, these are guys that have some versatility. They should be able to help hold it down low, and I do think that a Rice team that they themselves are looking to go big, I think that that's going to cause for a little bit of clunkiness and a little bit of a lower scoring game. As a result, I made my total a 143, like the under, and I think that Oregon just overwhelms this Rice team. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 16.5 with Oregon, 741, 742 on the card. UC Irvine, shots off for the Anteaters. They play us to Cal Baptist. Cal Baptist, it's an underdog of 7.5 points. So on this game between 147 to 148.5, and with UC Irvine, I did set them as a favorite here of 6.5 points. So going to be willing to take 7+ here with Cal Baptist. Cal Baptist, they really struggled with their three-point shooting last year, outside the top 250 in terms of three-point shooting percentage, but you bring back Martell Williams. This is how they do it. He was able to give the team 9 points and was a mid-30s three-point shooter a season ago, and that's big considering you've got Dominique Daniels back, who has never really been a great three-point shooter, but is someone that last season was able to supply 20 points per contest. That's very rock solid, and overall, you've got some good size with this Cal Baptist team, and that's big because they go up against a UC Irvine team that year in and year out, they're one of the top rebounding teams in all of college basketball. Being able to bring back a true 7-footer and Brady Henjay, that's big after he didn't necessarily give the team a ton of seasons ago, but I think that he's going to be able to take some steps forward. Thomas Endong, he's a 6'10" big man that comes on over from Oregon State, an international man of mystery who he comes over from the country of Canada. I think that he's going to be able to make a little bit of an impact, and I like the game of Jaden Jackson. Jackson was over at Northern Arizona last year, 12.5 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists, just a nice stat sheet stuffer that shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, and UC Irvine is in quite a bit of transition from a season ago, losing the likes of Delvin and Tillis along with Miles Shea from a team that over the last few seasons has been one of the best three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. That hurts, but getting back Jurian Dixon, who he last season was able to give the team 9 points per contest, that's big. He last year only shot 33% from three. Reason to believe that he's going to be able to take some strides forward in this system, but you're probably going to be looking at Darren Sarin to step up, who he 2 seasons ago over at Irvine was averaging 10 points on 35% three-point shooting as a sixth man. He went to Samford last year and just saw no minutes whatsoever at Samford, so now he's back here with UC UC Irvine, but even though this is going to be a team that's going to be rock solid down low, I have reason to believe that Kyle Evans is really going to be able to take some nice strides forward after he was more of a sixth man coming off the bench for like 3.5 rebounds per game. I think that he's going to be able to continue the great success that this Irvine team always has down low. And Tama Isic, he in the first game of the season for the team, a true freshman that comes over from New Zealand, he did have 10 assists, so there's reason to believe that there's upside there. That said, the experience of Cal Baptist, I think, keeps them in this game. I think that Irvine going to once again be a nice defense-oriented team. Last year, Irvine, a top 20 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, so I did set a total here of a 142.5, like the under, and at north of 7, I'm going to be willing to take the points with Cal Baptist. 743, 744 on the card. It is UCLA. They play us at Pepperdine. Pepperdine is open to have a wave of a cover as they're 27.5 point underdogs. 152.5 to 153.5 is the total, and I made a total of 144.5. I do like the under with Pepperdine. Certainly a team that's in quite a bit of transition as they had a coaching change last offseason, and for Pepperdine, it just felt like they really couldn't find their footing last season. They do lose quite a few guys by the transfer portal from a season ago, so I do think that this is going to be a little bit of an uphill battle for them this season. As a result, I made UCLA a 28.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 28 with them. You've got Javon Cooley, who's got some nice experience. They spent some time with Marist, where he was a relatively good three-point shooter, career 38% three-point shooter, but outside of Danilo Dosic, who was a solid player for them last year at 6'10", a little bit of versatility, you just have nobody that came back for this team from a season ago. Now you're looking at a guy like an Aaron Clark, who he began his career at Wake Forest, but couldn't get out there on the floor to be able to help out this backcourt. You bring in the gentleman from UW Green Bay in Turkey, Yatvin Levy, who he saw some relatively good production, and he's a versatile guy at like 6'8", but that said, a very unproven guy at the college basketball level, having to go up against UCLA, who they bring back the Daily Show and Eric Daly, who's able to give you 12 plus points per contest. He and Tyler Billadu both have good size. They're able to pop it well from three. They bring back Sky Clark, a double-figure scorer from a season ago, and now they bring in Donovan Den, which leads me to believe that UCLA is going to be a little bit more off-tempo. Den was a part of a New Mexico team that was a top 40 team in terms of total possessions per game, but that said, that New Mexico team was also a top 30 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, so I have reason to believe that the defense is going to be rock solid. Dent has a nice nose for the ball. This has been a UCLA team that since Mick Cronin has taken over, they've been a lower tempo team, and they've always been a top 40 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and I do think that that defense is going to be holding very true here. I think they hold down a Pepperdine team that, again, it just doesn't feel like they necessarily have an identity. You take a look at what Pepperdine did last year in terms of total possessions per game. They were hovering right around about 139th in all of college basketball, and I think the UCLA neutralizes them. With UCLA, we'll lay up to 28 with them, and I'm in on the under. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we hit the extra games. 745, 746. St. Mary's is going to be playing against Chattanooga. The Mocs are a 13.5 point underdog. 144.5 is the total, and with Chattanooga, I made them a 15.5 point underdog. So I'm going to be willing to lay with St. Mary's. St. Mary's was number one in all of college basketball in terms of their rebound percentage last season, and I don't think that St. Mary's is necessarily going to be duplicating that. They do lose quite a few key pieces from that team from a season ago, but you still have Mr. Moravskis down low, who he was very rock solid for this team. With Moravskis, he was able to give the team right around about 8 rebounds per game, a double-figure amount of points per contest, and there's reason to believe that he and Andrew McKeever are going to be able to do a really good job of being a 1-2 punch down low. Like this St. Mary's team just absolutely reloads. They brought in a few guys via the transfer portal, like Jazz Gardner, who's a true 7-footer that should be able to give them a bit of something, but Harry Wetzels, even though he's not going to give you a lot of scoring, this guy had 6 rebounds, night number 1 at 7'1". He's going to be a menace on the glass. This is always the St. Mary's team that's one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball. Outside the top 340 in terms of total possessions per game last season, Mikey Lewis really took some nice strides forward, shot darn near 40% from 3 last season as a 6th man. He took that nice stride forward night number 1. He was able to put in their 23 points in their win against St. Thomas. And for Chattanooga, they have to replace pretty much each of their top 4 scorers from a season ago. Chattanooga, ever since Coach Dan Earl has taken over the system, they've been a top 50 team in terms of percentage of their shots that come from 3-point range. They just don't have that same 3-point shooting from a season ago. Like, they bring in Teddy Washington, who I liked over at Southeast Missouri State last year. Statue Suffer, 14 points, 2 steals, 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists per contest, but he shot less than 30% from 3-point range. You bring back a guy in Brandon Watkins, who I think that he's got plenty of upside. He began his career over at North Dakota State and VMI, career about 36% 3-point shooter, so he's solid, but even at North Dakota State, he was only putting in there about 6.5 points per contest. Is he really going to be able to be a, shall we say, upside guy that provides a lot of scoring? Sean Cusano is one of the few guys that returns from the season ago, a little bit of versatility. Have to have some question marks as to if he's going to be able to take those strides forward, and I think that this team just flat out gets dominated down low. St. Mary's, I think, is going to be able to impose their will, and Chattanooga's not not even necessarily a super up-tempo team. So semi line at 15.5, willing to lay with St. Mary's, and I'm in on the under semi-total 133.5. Now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-501, 306-502. Columbia is on the road against New Haven. New Haven is a home underdog of 6.5 to 5.5 points. So on this game, it is 152.5. Semi line at 5.5. So at 6+, I'm going to be able to take the points with New Haven. A relatively rock-solid effort from them night number one as they held in there with UConn. They were able to cover that number. That was a number that in a lot of places was north of 40 points. And for New Haven, I think it's going to be a rough season number one for them at the D1 ranks. They were a sub-500 team at the Division II level. They lose a lot of those guys from a season ago, but there's reason for optimism with them. The offense was not great in that night number one game, and I don't think that it is going to be moving forward, but Andre Pasha was able to put in there 17 points, 6 rebounds. They really don't have a lot of guys with Division I experience. Really, all the guys that they brought in were guys from the Division II ranks, so you're going to be relying upon a lot of unknowns with regards to their D1 stats and what have you, but this was a team that in their just heyday at the Division II ranks, they were always rock solid with regards to their defense, and I do think that they do a nice job holding down a Columbia team that they had a little bit of a changing of the guard in the offseason. They hire around a Florida assistant to take over the program in Kevin Hovde, and with Hovde, he's probably going to be looking to continue a Columbia team that was a really good three-point shooting team when they were fully healthy last season, but that was with Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa at the helm, and with him out of the fold, this is a squad that is going to be in quite a bit of transition. They do maintain a lot of the guys that they had from a season ago. Zain Adi Badri is a 6'10", little bit of a combo player that last year he was able to supply about 8 points, 5.5 boards. He's able to pop it from three. 2 years ago, shot 37.5% from three. Last year, that went all the way down to 25% from three-point range, but his team is going to be probably turning things over to Avery Brown quite a bit, who he had 11 points, 2.5 assists per game. Not a necessarily great three-point shooter, though, so Columbia, they're not going to have a ton from the outside. They're going to be relying upon Blair Thompson, who's at 6'8", a mid-30s three-point shooter, to be able to give this team some good versatility, and I just think that with Hovde, his system, trying to be able to implement that with a lot of the guys that returned from the season ago, it's just not necessarily going to work the world's greatest. I think that they just have flat-out more talent than New Haven, which is why I set my line at 5.5, but here at 6+, I'm going to be willing to take the points with New Haven. I think New Haven has a lot of success slowing things down, so I'm going to be in on the under semi-total more at a 143.5. 306-503, 306-504. Northeastern is on the road. They're facing off against Colgate. Colgate is exploring a minty fresh cover as a 3-point favorite. 147.5 is the total, and I did set my line at a 6.5. I'm going to be willing to lay it with Colgate. They looked solid night number one against Michigan State. They lose that game by 11 points, and for Colgate, what was really missing for them last season was three-point shooting. When Colgate has been able to make the NCAA tournament, when they've been one of the better mid-majors in all of college basketball, it's because they were really able to light it up from three. Last year, they just did not have that. With a lot of these guys having another year in the system, that should be a little bit better. Jalen Cox, he's going to be looked to as that do-it-all sort of guy. He had 12 points, 8 boards, 7 assists in that night number one game against Michigan State, and he was a nice versatile piece for them last season as well, but just didn't necessarily shoot it well from three-point range. You have to think that Brady Cummins is probably going to be one of those main three-point shooters last year. Shot about 34.5% from three, and 2 years ago, 38% from three. He's going to be probably looked to as a main off-the-ball scorer, and I think that he's got a lot of success there. And for this Colgate team, having the likes of Keegan Records, Jeff Woodyard down low, that's going to be a little bit of a tough transition, but Sam Wright looked really good in that game against Michigan State. He had 17 points, and last year was able to supply the team with 5.5 points. It's versatility at 6'9", shooting in the mid-30s from three-point range, and then on the other end, you've got yourself a bunch in Northeastern that it just feels like the game has passed by Bill Cohen a little bit. You have a guy in L.A. Pratt who was a nice scorer for them last season, and he, night number one, was able to put in there 26 points, so a lot of reason for optimism there. You don't have a lot of size down low, though. Yuri Fritz is someone that stands in the neighborhood about 6'9", and he was able to supply the team with 15 points in that season opening game, and he is the brother of Jaco Fritz, so I mean, a lot of Division I experience there, but for this Northeastern team, they don't necessarily have a lot of guys that go bombs away from three, losing the likes of Masai Troutman, who's one of their top scorers over the last few seasons. That's rough for them. I do think that Colgate is going to be able to control things on the glass. Colgate not a team that's going to generate a lot of turnovers or anything like that, but Northeastern, they're always typically a little bit of a lower tempo team that when they've had success, it's been on the glass, and I just don't think that they have that with this squad. With Colgate, I'm willing to lay up to 6 with them, and I'm in on the underside by total 142.5. 306-505, 306-506. Boston U is on the road against Northwestern, and Northwestern is a double-figure favorite. You're going to be finding them at 15 to 16 point favorites, as 135.5 to 136.5 is the total, and I said Northwestern has a 16-point favorite. I'm willing to lay up to 15.5 with them, with this Northwestern team they did a nice job of being able to hold down Mercyhurst night number one. Now, Mercyhurst is one of your lesser teams in all of college basketball, to say the least, but still, this is a Northwestern team I think is going to be a little bit more controlled and a bit better on the defensive side of things than a season ago, and they still have one of, in my opinion, the more underrated players in all of college basketball. As last year, you were able to get over 20 points per contest out of Mr. Nick Martinelli. He had 17 points night number one, but looks like he's going to get a little bit more help out of guys like Arrington Page, along KJ Wyndham, who returned from his season ago, and having Jaden Reed in the fold as well is going to be able to help. Reed was over at South Florida last year. He was averaging 12.5 points, career 39% three-point shooter. That helps out because you had Ty Berry always be a really nice three-point shooter for this team. Now, this is not going to be a team that goes back to necessarily the heyday of Boo Buie in terms of their overall offensive efficiency, but with this team, they always do a nice job in terms of being able to take care of the ball. They typically have a little bit of a rough go of it on the glass, but there's reason to believe that Trey Singleton, the true freshman, is going to be able to help out with that. He had 6 rebounds night number one, and for Northwestern, their kryptonite is typically on the glass. And Boston U, to their credit, they have a lot of guys that are able to give you some good rebounding. You've got a guy like an Otto Landrum that has been around the block, dealt with a lot of injury last season, but 2 years ago was averaging about 5 rebounds per contest. You have to think that you're going to be able to get some good production out of Michael Aaron McNair, who last season he supplied the team with 10 points, threw in there about 3.5 boards, shot 40% from 3-point range. It's a 6'5", do-it-all sort of player, but Boston U has always been a team that's been very rough with their offense outside the top 250 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They do an okay job of generating second and third chances, but their main attribute is not allowing you to get second and third chances. You bring back Malcolm Chamazi, who's got size. He's been, over the last few seasons, giving the team 5+ rebounds per game, and Sam Hughes, he had a really nice performance as a true freshman, 21 points in their first game of the season, but for Boston U, always a team that's outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, and I do think that with Northwestern, that backcourt play is just going to guide them to victory here. I set my line at a 16, so one to lay to 15.5 with Northwestern, and like the under semi total, 132, 3-6-5-07, 3-6-5-08. Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin plays host to Arkansas State, and Arkansas State finds themselves as a very slim 1-point favorite. Total on this game between 151 to a 152, semi total 146.5. I like the under. Now, Stephen F. Austin, when they really have things humming with regards to their system, they typically are a top 100 team with regards to total possessions per game, and with Coach Pannone coming on over from Alabama, this is an Arkansas State team that you have to figure is going to be very up-tempo. All those NATO's disciples are typically playing very up-tempo, but I think that Stephen F. Austin system just really wins out here. I set my total at 146.5. I like the under with Stephen F. Austin. Year in and year out, they're a top 10 team in terms of their turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Problem for Stephen F. Austin was last season, they had absolutely no three-point shooting whatsoever. That team was absolutely brutal from three-point range, but another year in the system for Kean Thompson, who he missed the first 10 or so games of the season last year before averaging about 13 points per contest is big. Gerald Colonel, he comes over after at Northwestern State a season ago. He was averaging a little bit over 2 blocks. He was able to supply the team with 5.5 rebounds per game. That gives Stephen F. Austin more of a low post presence that they haven't had in the past. And you've got Kashawn Christmas back in the fold. It is Christmas when this guy is out there on the floor. He was a starter last year that put in there 7.5 points, 5.5 boards, 6'5", do-it-all, versatile piece that is able to do a nice job in terms of generating turnovers himself, and there's reason to believe that with Cam Burton in the backcourt that this team is going to be a bit more, shall we say, efficient with regards to their offense. And Arkansas State clearly has a little bit more talent in this case, but that said, you've got a lot of guys that are just going to be figuring out their role. Chandler Jackson, who was an 8th starter over at Florida State last season, he did have 21 points in that season opening game for Arkansas State. You've got a guy like a TJ Caldwell who's been around the block quite a bit. He spent some time at the SEC level with Ole Miss the last few seasons. He was just dealing with injury last year, but that said, he's a guy that I think is going to be able to provide some upside, and you've got a little bit of a revenge battle with Matt Heyman, who was one of the top scorers for Stephen F. Austin last year. 14 points, 4 boards, 3.5 assists, was shooting 37% from 3, one of the few guys that could really bomb it from 3-point range. He's on the side of Arkansas State as well, but Arkansas State did have 18 turnovers in their season opening win against Ohio. That's reason to be very much concerned. I think that Stephen F. Austin is going to do a nice job taking advantage of an Arkansas State team that's in quite a bit of transition, force those turnovers, and really get this game played at their sort of pace and their sort of tenor. I set my line at 2.5. I like Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin on the money line, and I'm going to be willing to take a shot on this total under as well. 306-509, 306-510. George Mason, he's going to be playing us to Winthrop. Winthrop finds themselves as an underdog here of 11.5 points on this game between 146 to a 148. Did set my total 145.5. I like the under. Winthrop is always a top 50 team in terms of total possessions per game. George Mason last year outside the top 240 in terms of total possessions, and I just think that their raw defensive ability is going to be able to keep this total under with George Mason. They were a top 15 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis last season. Now, while they do lose the likes of Jalen Haynes from 8 seasons ago, they did a nice job retaining Braden O'Connor. He was a guy that was able to give the team double figures in the backcourt, and he figures to be the head of the snake this season. Going against a Winthrop bunch that they were able to have a triumph night number 1 against Queens NC. Actually, that was very early AM in terms of day number 1, but that's it for Winthrop. They are a team that's in quite a bit of transition as they lose pretty much 5 out of their top 6 scorers from season ago, so they're looking to a new look backcourt with Kareem Rozier coming over from Duquesne, where he was giving out 3 assists per contest, but not necessarily the most assertive scorer in the world. Dalen Berry looked very good in that opening game, 23 points after he came over from Charleston Southern, where last season he was averaging about 14 points per contest, but was a sub-33 point shooter. And for Winthrop, I do think that this team is going to have some difficulty with their 3-point shooting. Cody Cluett, who comes over from San Diego, and he was able to be a relatively okay player over at San Diego. He was at the Division II level a few seasons ago, averaging about 8 points per contest last season. And Logan Duncombe, I think, is going to be able to do a nice job down low. He's not quite Kelton Telford, but he did have 12 points, 8 boards in that season opening game and began his career at Indiana. Just wasn't able to get out there on the floor. He was in the shadow of Telford last season, so I do think that they're going to be able to do a solid job there, and I think that Ty Hamilton, who was really a afterthought in that opening game, he's going to be able to take hold a little bit more. But for George Mason, bringing Corey Mincy, who was averaging about 15 points per game in the Big South over at Presbyterian, was a nice add, and Riley Allenpatch, very under-the-radar guy who was over at Sanford last season at 6'11". He was shooting 48% from three-point range, albeit on a small sample size, but he'll be able to give this team versatility. I think that that's a guy that Winthrop will not be able to account for, and George Mason, once again, looks like they're going to be a team that's going to be amazing on the glass, with so many guys like Adola Adebayo coming over from Mount St. Mary's, being able to pound the boards. Jari Long, I think, has a lot of upside as well, and I think that there's really good depth with a George Mason team that's going to be playing relatively slow, relatively control, and allow them to be able to get the job done. I set my line at 15.5. I'm going to be willing to lay with George Mason, like the under as well, so my total 145.5. 36-5-11, 36-5-12. Gardner Webb is on the road facing off against Clemson. Clemson, a very sizable favorite here. You're going to be finding them as 29.5 to 30.5 point favorites, and so on this game, you're going to get anywhere between 147.5 to 148.5. Made my total 141.5. I do like the under for Clemson. This team, year in and year out, they play at a very slow and controlled style, and we saw them absolutely house New Hampshire night number 1. New Hampshire was unable to get past the 60-point plateau in that game, and I do think that this is going to be another one of those sorts of games where it's going to be Clemson really just exerting their will on the defensive side of things. Clemson does lose 4 of their top 5 scores from a season ago, but they get RJ Godfrey back. He began his career over at Clemson, was able to put up some good numbers over at Georgia. He should be able to help out this team in the post. He had 9 rebounds, 3 assists in that opening day game. And then Ace Buckner, he's a guy that I think is going to be able to make a big impact as a freshman. Very highly touted guy. He had a nice debut with 18 points. You've got Justin Porter, who comes in as a double-figure scorer over at Middle Tennessee 8 seasons ago, and then bringing in Carter Welling, a nice shot blocker, a nice guy with size over at Utah Valley. I think is going to be able to help this team even further as well. And then on the flip side, you got a Gardner Webb team that they just have lost their identity with Coach Luther coming in for Gardner Webb. This bunch was just always a relatively solid team on the glass, but they would always have a bit of a tough time with regards to guard play, and it looks like they just don't have a lot of anything right now. They're going to be looking at DJ Jefferson to be able to step things up after he actually began his career at Tennessee, was unable to get out there on the floor at Longwood last season, and he was unable to score in their season opening game. That's a bit of an issue. Ace Talbert was a pretty nice go-to scorer over at St. Francis, Pennsylvania 2 seasons ago, limited to 5 games a season ago, but career about 37.5% three-point shooter, so he's able to play off the ball, but who's going to be that main facilitator? The team really didn't find that at night number 1. Jacob Hudson, who comes on over from last season, giving this team in that neighborhood of about 4 points per contest. He's a guy that they're going to need to step up, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do so. You just don't have the size that you're used to with this team. And Curtis Williams III is a guy that I think is going to need to step up as a non-Division I transfer. He had a very silent day number 1 where they just got blasted by Minnesota by a count of 87-60. It's a Gardner Webb team that just does not have the same rebounding that they've had in the past, and I think that Clemson really takes a fight to them down low. I did set my line at 25.5. I do think that we're going a little bit too far with Clemson because they do lose quite a bit from last season as well, especially with regards to the backcourt. So I'm going to be willing to take the Cobb tone of points here with Gardner Webb, and I'm in on the under. 36-5-13, 36-5-14. Virginia plays us NC Central. NC Central, an underdog of 33.5 to 34 points. 152.5 to 153 is the total, and I did set a total of 139.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under with Virginia. I think that this is certainly going to be a much more up-tempo team than what they have been in past years, because under the Tony Bennett / the Ron Sanchez system, they were always a bottom 10 team in terms of total possessions per game. But you look at what Ryan Odom did when he was over at VCU. It's not like these teams were playing at warp speed or anything like that. VCU was a really good team in terms of being able to generate turnovers. Now with Odom, if you look at his time over at Utah State, I'm sure they were maybe a little bit more up-tempo, but for NC Central, this is a team that they pride themselves on generating turnovers. Top 25 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per-possession basis. Where they went wrong last season is that they were well outside the top 320 in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage. They do a much better job in terms of being able to guard the perimeter, and I do think that Virginia should be able to get the job done rather handily, but I do think that this number is a little bit out of sorts because NC Central just got completely dump-trucked by NC State, night number one. They lose that game 114-66. I think that Lavelle Moten, who's the former AAU coach of John Wall, has a little bit more pride, and I think that Kendrick Davis, who he comes over after he had about 10 points per contest over at West Georgia, he's going to be able to find his footing, and Deontay Johnson is going to be an impact guy as well. He, last season for NC Central, was a starter that was more of an ancillary guy, good pass first guy, 6 points, 4 assists per contest. That's going to help out Davis in terms of being able to find a shot for NC Central. They're probably going to be a little bit weak down low, but bringing Jonathan Dunn from Coppin State should be able to help out with that a little bit. And for Virginia, they've got a lot of mixing and matching with regards to their pieces. You didn't have Odom bring over a ton of guys from VCU, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I do think that this is a very, very talented Virginia team. You bring over a guy that I really liked a season ago, Emily Thomas, who was averaging darn near 20 points per contest over at San Francisco, began his career at USC. Jakari White was a nice rock solid guard over at Temple as well. Go Owls. And the international men of mystery and Jonah Gonlu, hopefully I got that correct, and Thaddeus de Ritter, who comes over from Antwerp, Belgium. These guys really were able to have a nice number one performance, and you saw that Virginia defense really take hold. I know that Ryder also didn't score much against Rutgers, but 87-53. I do think that Virginia is going to be a little bit more defense oriented than this north of 150 total would indicate. So I'm in on the under. I do think that with NC Central having some veterans in the backcourt, they hold in there. So my line at a 23.5, so I'm going to be willing to take those points with NC Central. 306-515, 306-516. Mount St. Mary's is going to be playing us a Bucknell. The bracket plus some Bison do find themselves as a underdog of 3.5 points. So on this game, it is 143.5, and I mean a total of 140.5. I do like the under with Bucknell. The squad does lose so much of their just overall production from a season ago, including the 7-footer and Noah Williamson, and that has me quite a bit out on them. Now, Mount St. Mary's, they do lose the likes of Adol Adbayo, who I really liked in terms of his low post presence from a season ago, but for Mount St. Mary's, even though they are a team that's also in quite a bit of transition, having a guy like Xavier Lipscomb back in the backcourt is so big, and Bucknell just simply doesn't have that sort of a guy. And for Xavier Lipscomb, this is pretty much his 6th year of college basketball. Last season with Mount St. Mary's, did a nice job dishing it out. Only about 7 points per contest, but he was giving the team a little bit over 4 assists per contest. Career 37% three-point shooter. You'd love to see that, and this team still has quite a bit of size. They're going to be looking to Yakai Diop, a 7-footer who's a little bit of a project player, to be able to give them some upside towards back half of the season, but as he develops, Luke McKeldin, who's saying 6'10", he comes over from the UK, he should be able to give this team something right away. And Justin Amati is a very well-traveled man, spent some time at James Madison in Tulsa where he actually saw significant minutes. I think that he's going to be pretty rock solid down low, and for Bucknell, you just don't have the size with losing Noah Williamson from a season ago. They're going to be looking to Royat Bajek, who last season, he was a nice scorer along with Brandon McCreesh. McCreesh was able to put in there about 8 points per contest last season. Bajek, he's a career neighborhood about 6.5 point per game scorer last year. 9 points, shot about 33% from 3-point range for a Bucknell team that was a top 150 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but really lacked on offense. They're going to need Achille Spendone, who's been with the program for quite a while, to be able to step it up a little bit. Last season, he had 8.5 points, and from 3-point range, only shot about 30% for 3, but did pull in there about 4.5 rebounds per game, but not having as much size from season ago. They're looking to the freshman and Amon Doris to be able to step up. I just don't know if they're going to be able to have that, and with Quinn Berger never stepping up after he transitioned from St. Joe's and never has really been able to find his footing with the team, I do think that Mount St. Mary's gets the job done. A relatively slog of a game. Mount St. Mary's typically outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game. Made my line 6.5, so one to lay with Mount St. Mary's, and I'm in on the under, so by total 140.5. 306-517, 306-518. Longwood is on the road against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a favorite of 17 points. So it's a game between 148.5 to 149, and I made my line 12.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Longwood. With Longwood, this team typically has a little bit of a tough time getting it going on offense. We saw them towards the early part of the season really struggle with their three-point shooting, and then in Big South play, they were able to really emerge, and they were able to light it up last season. But I like Ronnie Thomas as a coach. He's done a nice job in terms of stacking a lot of players that I think are just complementary of one another. You've got the Elijah Jones, Elijah Tucker. These two guys combined for 20 points and 14 rebounds in that season opening game. It does feel like they're going to be sort of searching for who might be that main facilitator throughout the season, but I do think that you're going to be able to get a lot of production off the ball from Jalen Bernard, who he was a little bit more of an ancillary piece a season ago, but Troy Hutchinson, this is a guy that comes in from George Washington, and I think that he's going to make a big impact. Part-time starter a season ago, 6.5 points, 2.5 assists, a steal per game. 2 seasons ago, was shooting 40% from 3. Really took a dive last season, but that said, I think that he's going to be able to help this team stay in it against a Pittsburgh team that they had a tough time with Youngstown State, even though they were able to get the cover. I mean, that was a game that was very nip and tuck until the final few minutes. They're in a lot of transition as they lose a lot of their backcourt from a season ago. As, I mean, you got Jalen Lowe now playing for Ketucky. Cam Corn should be able to win the battle down low. He had 12 rebounds in that season opening game. And Papa Amadou Kante, he was glued to the bench last season, but he's a guy that at 6'10" was a former top 125 recruit. He certainly is going to be able to make an impact down low, but they were relying upon DeMarco Minor to really have the keys to the offense. He was solid over at Oregon State last season. Not too much of a scorer, but 10 points, 5 assists. He's always been a career only about 30% three-point shooter, but he's able to find guys in space that are able to knock down threes, but who are going to be those guys that knock down threes? Barry Dunning, who comes on over from South Alabama, I have to have some question mark there. He's dealt with some injuries throughout his career, and Deshaun Jackson is right now on the shelf dealing with a little bit of an injury, so I do think that this Longwood team holds in there. Set my line at 12.5, so take the points with Longwood. I like this total under as well. I set my total at a 142.5. 36-5-19, 36-5-20. Florida State is going to be playing against Alabama State. Alabama State is an underdog of 22.5 to 23.5 points. 161 to 162 is the total. And I did set Florida State as a favorite of 19.5 points. I'm going to be willing to take the 20 plus here with Alabama State. Alabama State, to their credit, always really good at being able to take care of the ball. Top 5 team last season in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, but you do have TJ Madlock, the son of Tony Madlock, the coach, now on the fold. So this is going to be an Alabama State team that's in quite a bit of transition. They lose their top 5 scorers from a season ago, but I firmly do believe that Madlock is a very rock-solid coach and is going to be able to get these guys just firing all cylinders. As John Anderson, who comes over after he spent some time at Queens NC along with Utah Tech, is going to be a big cog for this. Last year was averaging about 5 points per contest. He is a guy that you really don't want off the ball because he's not a great three-point shooter, but I think that he can have the ball in his hands a little bit, and I do think that this team, even though they don't necessarily have amazing size, having just Steven Walker back, who he last season was able to do a solid job giving the team 5.5 points, 3.5 boards, and a part-time starter role, is really going to be able to elevate them at 6'10". I think that he takes some strides forward. Additionally, I do think that Micah Simpson being back in the fold is very big. For Micah Simpson, he was able to, as about a sixth man last season, give the team about 6 points, shot 33% from 3. Nice glue guy with regards to the defense. And on the other end for Florida State, they were able to really run up the score against Alcorn State. Alcorn State, though, is a team that they're in a lot of transition as they were breaking in a new coach as well. Luke Locks, he comes over from the NBA, and he's got Chancey Wiggins, who comes over from Clemson. He was able to get 22 points in that opening game. Lajay Jones was a nice three-point shooter over at St. Bonaventure. He was able to put in there 18 points in night number 1, and for Florida State, 13 of 30 from three-point range. I don't necessarily think that they're going to be able to duplicate that. Alabama State does have a few issues with regards to being able to guard the three-point shot, and for Robert McCray, he's been a nice do-it-all sort of guy who comes over from Jacksonville over the last 2 seasons. And Kobe McGee, nice three-point shooter as well. I have a little bit of question mark with what you're going to be able to get out of Alir Mulak and company down low. I do think that Florida State might be lacking a little bit with regards to that post presence. It feels like they've got a lot of depth, and they're trying to figure out what is all going to be working / not working for this team. And I do think that that's going to be working to the advantage of an Alabama State team as relatively efficient, relatively mid-tempo team, and I think that they hold in this game. So my total 151.5, like the under and the points here with Alabama State. 36-5-21, 36-5-22. Widener is on the road. They're facing off against Seton Hall, and Seton Hall is a pretty big size favorite here of 23.5 to 25 points. 132 is your total, and I'm going to be one. Take a shot here on the under. I did set Siena is only a favorite of more 15.5 points because with Wagner, I recognize that this offense was awful last season. 357th in all of college basketball in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and losing that top scorer in Zaire Williams in the offseason. That was not necessarily great, but I mean, for Siena last year, they were outside the top 340 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and even though you add in there Adam Clark, who he was rock solid over at Merrimack in terms of giving you 19 points per game, he didn't shoot it well from three, and Siena was well outside the top 320 in terms of their three-point shooting percentage a season ago. Who's going to take these threes? Like, you've got a guy in Tawan Simpkins who he was an ace double-figure scorer over at Elon last season as a part-time starter. You put in there 14.5 points per game, but he shot like 27% from three-point range. You're probably going to be looking at A.J. Sam McCray, who he had a tumultuous run over at Miami 2 seasons ago over at Stanford. He was a solid three-point shooter, but lots of question marks there. This is not quite the same rebounding team that you expect to see from Seton as well. They're going to be looking at Nashai Hines, who had 9 rebounds in that season opening game. It was a nice win over St. Peter's 77-50. And for Seton, I do think that the defense is going to be solid. Wagner, though, they were a top 100 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis 8 seasons ago. They're bringing quite a few guys that were at the non-Division I level last year, like a Benio Basile, who he was actually out there in the country of Canada. He had 9 rebounds in the team season opener. I do think that you're going to be able to get a little bit more of Elijah Brown, who he didn't see a lot of minutes at number 1, but he's a freshman that has a little bit of upside for the team. And I do think that Xavier Fitch, who's one of the main holdovers from a season ago, part-time starter that averaged 4.5 points, 4.5 boards per contest for the team last season, he's going to do a nice job of just keeping the defensive identity for Wagner. I think that both of these teams are going to be super slow. I think both of these teams are going to be solid on defense and leave a lot to be desired on offense. As a matter of fact, I said my total 119.5. That's about the total that we were getting last year when these two teams matched up. I think that you're in for a slog, and I think that Wagner covers this big number. Taking the points with Wagner and the under. 3 of 6-5-23, 3 of 6-5-24. UConn plays us at UMass Lowell. Lowell does find themselves as a pretty good size underdog. They are between 33.5 to 34.5 point dogs, and your total on this game, it is 153.5. And with UConn, I made them a 33-point favorite at 33.5 plus. I'm going to be willing to take the points with UMass Lowell. This is not the same Massachusetts Lowell team that we've seen in the past, but this has been a program that has been able to form themselves as one of the better teams in terms of the America East. They are going to be looking to turn over a new leaf in the backcourt. Khalil Farmer is going to be able to help them out with that. He comes on over after he last season was over at Hofstra, putting in there about 4.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range as an ancillary part-time starter. I do think that he's got a little bit of upside, and I know that they were really buzzing about J.J. Massaquoi in the offseason. He had 14 points in that season opening game, so you do like to see that. And then I do think that Isaiah Walter coming on over from the non-D1 ranks, he's going to be able to make some nice impact for the team as well. When this UMass Lowell team has really been firing on all cylinders, it's actually been the rebounding, and having Austin Green put in their 13 rebounds, number 1, was a good side. Now, with Connecticut, they obviously are going to be able to win the battle on the glass. You've got Alex Caravan coming back, 6'8" combo player who shoots in the high 30s from 3. He had a double-double in that season opening win over New Haven, 19 points, 10 rebounds, and bringing back Solo Ball, who was a 40+% three-point shooter a season ago, is big, as now he can play much more off the ball with having Malachi Smith coming over from Dayton, where he was averaging 5+ assists per contest. Silas Semery, the transfer from Georgia, I really think fits the system at 6'5". He does just a little bit of everything. And Dwayne Karama, I think, was a little bit of a shrewd under-the-radar get who comes on over after he was a nice scorer over at Lemoyne. But I do think that this number is starting to get just a little bit lofty, as I know that Coach Hurley, he loves to just be able to pound teams into oblivion, but his UConn team is also very much defense-oriented and is built around just being able to play rough and tumble style, and I do think that that's going to be taking hold here. As a result, I made my total 139. I'm going to be in on the under to go along with north of 33 points here with UMass Lowell. 36-5-25, 36-5-26. Bryant is on the road against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech does find themselves as 16.5 point favorites. So on this game, it is between 144.5 to 146.5. This is way too high of a total, considering Georgia Tech scored 56 points in a game against Maryland Eastern Shore to begin the season. That's not necessarily so tremendous. And Jamie Young Christian, I think that the hate went a little bit too far with him as a coach. I thought that he actually did a pretty solid job when he was over at George Washington, coupled with the tenure that he had over at Mount St. Mary's, and he brings with him quite a bit of size. I think can compete against a power conference team. Keegan Harvey is a guy that he recruited over at George Washington, dealt with a little bit of injury throughout his career. Quincy Allen is a former top 175 recruit that just always dealt with injuries as well. Both of these guys should be able to provide some size. And Timothy Radulski, he, in his first game with with Bryant. He's a little bit of an international man of mystery at 6'9". He had 15 points, was very encouraged with what I saw there, and this is a team that probably will be struggling a little bit with regards to backcourt, but Khalil Williams is a guy that comes in for the non-D1 ranks. I think that he's going to be relatively solid, and you tell that this Georgia Tech team, just not the same team with Nathan George, who decided to transfer in the offseason, not running things. Now, Bain Dongo, he's been a career about 15.8 rebound per game guy that shoots in the mid-30s from three-point range at 6'9". Love his game. And Kwasi Reeves is a guy that just makes things happen. Began his career over at Florida last season with his Georgia Tech squad. He was putting in there about 9.5 points. It's been a career about 32% three-point shooter. So the Georgia Tech three-point shooting, you have to figure that it's going to be a little bit rough, even with them bringing in Chaz Kelly, who was over at Boston College last season. But I mean, even at Boston College, he wasn't even able to make too much of an impact there. This is going to be a Georgia Tech team that's very much going to be based down low, and having just so many random pieces in the backcourt. I do like some of the freshmen that come in, like an Eric Chatfield and company, but it's going to take them some time to be able to find their bearings, and I do think that for Georgia Tech, this is going to be a team that leaves a lot to be desired offensively, so I did set my total at a 143.5. Here at a 144 plus, I'm going to be in on the under Brian. Not quite as up-tempo now that they've had the coaching change, and for Georgia Tech, I can only set them as an 8.5 point favorite. I think Brian holds in there, so I'm going to be willing to take those points, and this total under 306.527, 306.528. It's Sonil on the road against DePaul. DePaul finds themselves as a good-sized favorite here. You're going to be laying between 21 to 21.5 points with them. 146, so 146.5 is the total. And I said Sonil is a 20.5 point underdog, so 21 plus. I'm going to be willing to take those points. Now with Todd Brogna out of the fold for Sonil, they did have to turn over a little bit of a new leaf with regards to the front court play, but you do return quite a bit of the guard stable from its season ago. And I do think that for the Sonil team, bringing in a guy, Will Batchelor, that I think can really be an impact guy is big, as he had 15 points in the first game of the season for them. He was over at Holy Cross the last few seasons where he was shooting nearly 40% from three, averaging a little bit over 10 points per contest. He's going to be able to deliver some versatility, and Chad Stinson coming back is massive as well. Stinson last season did a nice job being able to pack the stat sheet with about 8.5 points, 5 boards, 2.5 assists, 3.5 per contest. Not a great three-point shooter, but you know what? He's going to be able to make some things happen. And then additionally, you've got a guy that I think is going to be pass first in Trenton Ruth, who was able to put in their 5 assists in that season opening game. Now, again, the size is going to be a little bit of an issue, and DePaul, they should be able to dominate down low. And we saw DePaul be able to cover a lot of big-time spreads in the back half of the season last year, and they were able to do a nice job against Chicago State, winning that game by 30. NJ Benson, he had a double-double in that game, 16 points, 10 rebounds. He's going to be able to dominate down low in this game, and I'm curious to see what Theo Pierre Justin is going to be able to deliver. He saw some good minutes in that first game, and he was really glued to the bench last season. He was able to give the team quite a few rebounds. Come on, Maker is a 7'1" big man. That's a little bit of a project, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see what they do without Connor Enright running the show, as he was a really good pass-first guard for them. Brandon McLean looks like he's going to have some opportunities coming over from Radford, where he wasn't even necessarily too much of a passer. He had 6 assists in that opening game, but when he was at Radford, he was able to put in there 10 points per contest. He's a nice Swiss Army knife, a little bit of a guard. You've got a guy like a Landon Blocker who's not much of a three-point shooter, but he's able to do a nice job driving to the rim, nice defender. And then Caleb Banks, he was a rock-solid player over at Tulane as well. But I do think that Sonel, with just all of their returning guards, are going to be able to hold in there against a ball team that does have to replace their main point guard. So it's a total 144.5. I like the under and 21 plus here with Sonel. 306.529, 306.530. Eastern Illinois plays Listen Nichols. Nichols does find themselves as a very slim favorite of 1 point total. This game is between 135.5 to a 136. I did set a total here of a 145. I'm actually going to be in on the over. For Nichols, they actually played at a relatively good tempo against Ketucky. Neither team could knock down a three. Those two teams combined to shoot less than 23% from three-point range. So do think that things are going to be going a little bit northward. And I did set Nichols as the underdog because they do have to replace so much of their backcourt other than Trey English from a season ago. And English wasn't even too much of a scorer last year. He was averaging about 7.5 points per contest, relatively good passer, but now who are going to be those guys that step up as primary scorers? Christian Wilborn, you're hoping that he's able to give you a bit of something, as he was last season over at Iona, giving that team about 4 points per contest. Started his career at St. Joe's, but has been a career less than 25% three-point shooter. Jalen Rice is someone that comes on over from Cleveland State, where he was averaging about 3.5 points per contest. So The backcourt play leaves quite a bit of something to be desired. They should be relatively solid down low. Z Harmoda down low, but that's it for Eastern Illinois. I really do think that Marty Simmons is doing a nice job building this thing the right way as Eastern Illinois. They are going to be able to do a nice job down low as they bring back a guy that I really like in Cooper Jacoby. Cooper Jacoby last season was able to average 8+ rebounds per game at 6'7". He's able to give you some three-point shooting. They don't have a ton of size with Nazareth Fisher, like the only guy in the roster that should see significant minutes above like 6'8". That said, I do think that Zion Fruster coming back from season ago is massive. Last year he was playing about 11.5 points per contest. He's able to give you a steal per game. Not an amazing three-point shooter, but a solid enough three-point shooter. And then Preston Turner down for what? Coming in from the non-D1 ranks, he made his presence known. Night number 1, he had 16 points in that loss to Valparaiso, a nip and tuck game. I think that that's big. Now Eastern Illinois, they're a little bit of a lower tempo team. I do think that Nichols is going to be playing a little bit more up tempo. I think that Nichols is going to try to generate some turnovers, and they're going to need to because they don't necessarily have a ton of three-point shooting, but did see with Eastern Illinois, they had a lot of turnovers, 20 in that game against Valparaiso. They themselves generated 14. I do think that both of these teams are going to be able to generate turnovers to lead to some fast break opportunities, so made my total 145. I like the over, and I do think that Jacoby is a difference maker. Said Eastern Illinois is a 2-point favorite, so I'm taking them on the money line. 36-5-31, 36-5-32. Murray State is playing us in Mississippi Valley State. The Delta Devils are a pretty big size underdog here of 35 points, and your total on this game between 152.5 to 153.5. Yay, verily, to the Mississippi Valley State Delta Devils being able to knock off the University for women. That said, I don't think that they're going to have the same triumph here. I set this line at 36.5. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 36 with Murray State. And I do think that Murray State is going to be a very fearsome team out there in the Missouri Valley Conference, bringing in Fred King, who he was missing in that opening game for Murray State, so you want to be checking his status, but he's going to be an impact guy when he's out there on the court. I think that he's going to be out for this one as well. Why play him against Mississippi Valley State? But you still have a guy Dylan Anderson, who, if I'm not mistaken, began his career at Arizona, a former top 150 recruit. He looked rock solid in his presence, and he was a true 7-footer that should be able to give you some nice versatility. And then Javon Jackson, coming over from UIC, where he was a really nice swing guard last season, 11.5 points. He shot just barely over 30% for three, but he's able to give you a steal and a half, 3 assists per contest. I think that he's a really nice glue guy. And then you've got a guy, Mason Miller, who 2 seasons ago over at Creighton was shooting well above 40% from three-point range. Lots of great weapons for this team, and they've got a lot of Creighton guys with Ryan Miller, who was an assistant over at Creighton a season ago, and then for Mississippi Valley State, again, nice win over the University of Women, but that said, they, in their season opener against UAB, lost 106-55. This was a team that was dead last in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and Michael James looks like he's good to be able to give you some relatively good production for the team. He comes in from the non-Division I ranks, and he, in that game against UAB, had 25 points. He had 35 points against the University of Women, which, again, I'm going to throw those out the window because that's not even like a real opponent. But you don't return much from the season ago. What are you going to be able to get down low? You're probably going to be looking at Antonio Sick to be able to run the point. You've got a little bit of size with Daniel Mayfield and Lamont Sims, but those are guys with really not a lot of Division I experience. You don't have relatively anything whatsoever returning from a season ago. This team is not stout down low. They have a tough time being able to take care of the ball. I think that Murray State should be able to run all over them. I set my total 138.5. I simply don't think the Mississippi Valley State does their part with this total, so in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay it with Murray State. 36-5-33, 36-5-34. Louisiana plays us to Southeast Louisiana. Southeast Louisiana, 3.5-point underdogs. 140.5 is the total. I did set my total of 143.5. I'm going to be in on the over. Southeast Louisiana, a relatively nice defense-oriented team, but now they're going to be missing their main guy in Brody Woodbury from a season ago, who at 6'11", was always a nice low post presence. This is going to be a bunch that's going to be playing a relatively slow and controlled style, but that said, I do think that Louisiana, they're going to be able to take some strides forward after they let go of Bob Marlin pretty much midseason last year. Quantis White is now taking over the program, and for Louisiana, not necessarily the start that they wanted to get off to. They lose 75-64 against Ball State, but that's a relatively good Ball State team, and they bring in an Oklahoma State transfer that I really like in Jamarian Keller. We saw some big time minutes when he was over there. He had 21 points in that season debut performance, and Dorian Finster, who began his career at Kansas State, had some relatively good production over at Sam Houston State last year. 8 points, 5.5 boards. He's going to be rock solid for the Louisiana team that I do think that they're going to be a probably mid-tempo team. I don't think that they're going to be super duper fast. I don't think that they're going to be super slow, but they brought in a really nice freshman in Joshua Lewis, a consensus top 75 guy who should be able to elevate a backcourt that probably is going to leave a little bit of something to be desired with regards to their three-point shooting. But for Southeast Louisiana, they also lost Jacavion Buckley, who was their main facilitator from a season ago. So this is a backcourt that's in quite a bit of transition. I do think that CJ Booker is going to be able to have a relatively nice season after he last year was relatively glued to the bench. When he was over at UT Rio Grande Valley, he was a starter and he was giving out 2.5 assists per game as a little bit more of a pass-first guy. I do think that he's going to be taking on that identity. And then Jeremy Alizi was averaging 10 points per contest as a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player. Southeast Louisiana probably going to leave a lot to be desired from three-point range, and they're going to be relying upon Isaiah Gaines to give them something down low. He began his career over at Radford along with Florida Atlantic, and he saw some relatively solid minutes. And then Obong Abazi Etam, he's someone that comes over from Central Arkansas 2 years ago, was averaging like 7.5 rebounds per game, fell out of favor with them last season. But I do think that for Southeast Louisiana, just a lack of guards and the turnover at the guard position is going to be really lackluster for them, and I think that that's going to cause them to have a rough go of it against the Raging Cajuns. I set Louisiana as a 7.5 point favorite, want to lay it with the Cajuns, and I'm in on the over sub. I total at a 143.5, 36, 535, 36, 536. Illinois is playing us the Florida Gulf Coast. Florida Gulf Coast is an underdog of 26.5 to 27.5 points. 157.5 to 159.5 is your total, and I mean a total of 150. I like the under for Illinois. I do think that this is going to be an improved team on the defensive side of things this year. They bring in a lot of international men of mystery, and with Brad Underwood's teams, they always like to be able to have that sort of international flair. You saw that with Kasparis Yakusonis a season ago, the way that he was able to take over things. Now it is a little bit of a banged up team, as Ty Rogers is right now dealing with a little bit of an injury. One or two of their international men of mystery are right now dealing with some eligibility concerns as well. But that said, this is still an Illinois team that has a Visic squared, Big Z, who is over at Arkansas and Ketucky, a nice shot blocker that's able to pop it from three. He comes in, and Tomislav Visic was shooting in the mid-30s from three-point range. He's able to give you 8+ boards, a double-figure amount of points per game, and you had David Marocevic. He, in game number 1, had 14 rebounds, absolutely took it to Jackson State. Jackson State, one of the smallest teams in all of college basketball, so the overall size of Illinois was really able to impose their will. This is a Florida Gulf Coast team that I think that they're going to be a little bit more up for the fight. So with Florida Gulf Coast, I set them as a 26-point dog. I'm going to be willing to take the points. It's a Dunk City team that they were outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game last year. They're looking to play pretty slow and controlled under Pat Chambers, and I do think that having a 6'10" big man in Tristan Gulate, who saw some very good minutes in the CBI last season, that's pretty encouraging for the team. You've got George Washington. He used to play over at Michigan, not our nation's first president, but he and Michael Duox, I think that these are rock solid guys. Duox was a nice player over at Northern Iowa that's been in the system for a few years and took some nice strides forward last year when he was averaging about 7 points per contest. Really was able to couple life turns back out of the season. Doesn't necessarily do one thing great, but he's just a little bit of a Swiss Army knife. And J.R. Kozinski, hopefully I said that correct, coming over from Notre Dame. I think that that's a big time add as well. During the 2023-24 campaign was mid-33 point shooter as a part-time starter, 7.5 points, 4.5 boards at 6'6", good versatility. They don't have quite the size to be able to match up with Illinois, but they do have much more size than Jackson State. I do think that this Florida Gulf Coast team that does a nice job being able to slow things down. They're pretty solid at being able to guard the perimeter, and Illinois last year was very rough with regards to their three-point shooting. And for this Dunk City team, they won the offensive rebound battle 25-4 in their first game, albeit it was against a non-Division I team in New College of Florida, but that was a good sign for them. So I do think that they're equipped to be able to handle the size of Illinois. So taking 26 plus here with Florida Gulf Coast, made my total 150. I'm in on the under 306, 537, 306, 538. South Carolina State is on the road against Samford. Samford 13 to 13.5 point favorites, 155.5 is the total. Since Samford is a 15.5 point favorite, I'm going to be willing to lay the number with South Carolina State. They just got absolutely dump trucked by Louisville. They lose that game by over 60 points. And for South Carolina State, they lose so much of what was making them so tick from a season ago. Last year with South Carolina State, they had so much versatility. They had a guy in Drayton Jones who was really able to lock it down low, and they just don't have that size this season. But that said, they are going to be looking to James Morrow, who I think is going to be able to step up after he was more of an ancillary piece the last 2 seasons at 6'8", as a little bit of a combo guy. Noah Treadwell is a freshman that they feel relatively good about. He saw some big-time minutes in night number 1, but you lose out of your top 7, top 8 guys, pretty much all but 1 or 2 of them. This is very much a new-look team, and Samford, they're obviously a new-look team as well. They lose Bucky McMillan, and they welcome in the Lipscomb coach from a season ago in Lenny Acuff. He does bring with him 1 or 2 guys from Lipscomb. You would have loved to have seen him bring in someone like a Jacob Agansevich. He was unable to land him, but that said, he was able to bring over Dylan Faulkner at 16 points, 8 rebounds in the team's opening game. That was a loss to Tulane, 85-72. It's very clear that with Acuff, even though his Lipscomb team was a little bit more slow and controlled last season, that they're going to be looking to bump up that tempo a little bit more. You've got the Norris brothers that come on over from Illinois State and Wright State, respectively, with Cade Norris probably being a little bit more of a facilitator for this team, has ever been a dominant scorer, but I do think that Will Shaver has quite a bit of upside. He comes on over after he began his career over at North Carolina in UAB, just was unable to get out there on the floor over at either school, but a guy that I think has a little bit of upside and is going to be able to help this team out. Dejon Humphrey, who comes over from Bowling Green, he's right now dealing with a little bit of an injury, so this team is going to be lacking a little bit more down low than what you typically expect, but I look at the South Carolina State team as a team that is really going to be struggling this year. South Carolina State is probably going to be looking to play up tempo once again. South Carolina State, year in and year out, they're typically one of the fastest teams in all of college basketball. Last year, they were a top 75 team in terms of total possessions per game. They held up relatively well defensively, but this year, with so much transition, I think that Samford takes it to them. I'm willing to lay up to 15 here with Samford, set my total at a 151.5, so taking the under to go along with Samford. 306-539, 306-540. Navy plays us at Yale. Yale's 5.5 point road favorite. Total on this game is 147.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Navy. I set this line at a 2.5. Navy returns over 90% of their minutes from a season ago. They are number 1 in all of college basketball in terms of returning production, and even though Navy did have a little bit of a changing of the guard at the coach, they did stay in-house with regards to that. John Perry is now taking over the program, and you have Aiden Koa along Don Draper, who I think are going to be absolute menaces down low. Draper at 6'5" just does a little bit of everything. Last year, 8.5 points, 8 boards, a steal and a half, 2 assists per game. I absolutely love what he's able to bring to the table, and Koa, he stands right around about 6'10", 230, strong guy that last year provided about 9 boards, a block per contest. Not a guy that's going to light you up from 3, but when Navy has really been firing all cylinders, typically they're able to generate a lot of turnovers. I think that they're going to find that identity with Austin Benjini, a 16 point per game scorer, back in Jinwoo Kim. This is a guy that's able to light you up from 3, a career 38% 3-point shooter. He really came alive towards the back half of the season last year. Just so much good depth with regards to the team, and for Yale, there is going to be a little bit of a changing of the guard from a season ago. I mean, this is a Yale team that they don't rebuild, they reload, but they do have to replace John Polakidis, who was a really good 3-point shooter for them, but Casey Simmons, who actually began his career over at Northwestern, that's going to be a guy that's going to, in my opinion, take a stride forward. He was as a starter last year, putting in their 9 points, shot in the high 30s from 3-point range, and then you have to expect this team to be able to get quite a bit out of Alex Kaliskar. Hopefully I said that correct. 7 points, 5 boards, and assists and a half per contest at 6'6". He's not a guy that's going to light you up from 3, but he does a lot in terms of being able to guard multiple positions. So I do think that Yale was a top 30 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. May take a little bit of a half a step back, but having Nick Townsend back, who was so good a season ago with his versatility, shot 48.5% from 3, which I don't think he quite duplicates that, but 15.5 points, 7 boards, 3.5 assists, a steal per contest. He's going to do some good things. Yale, not necessarily a super duper up-tempo team, and Navy is not necessarily a team that I think is going to be running it and gunning it either with this Navy team staying in-house. They are probably going to be outside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game. Yale, 161st in terms of total possessions per game, so I think that you get a little bit more of a defense-oriented game. I did set my total at a 144.5. I like the under, and getting 3+ here, I'll take Navy as a home underdog and wrap things up with 306-541, 306-542. You've got McNeese. They play on the road against Santa Clara. The Broncos of Santa Clara are 3.5 point favorites. Total is 153.5, and I made a total of a 147.5. I do like the under with McNeese. They lose a vast majority of things from a season ago. Bill Armstrong, he was an assistant over at Baylor. He takes over this program, but with McNeese, I still think that this is a pretty locked and loaded team with bringing in Gowari Duel, a former top 75 recruit that saw some solid minutes over at Siena. It's never really found it with regards to his scoring, but he'll give you some boards. He'll be able to dole out the ball a little bit as well. I like what he's able to bring to the table. And then Javon Garcia, I think, is a big-time X-factor for this team. Began his career at UMass. He's actually spent the last few seasons at McNeese, stayed with this program after he last year gave the team 12.5 points, a steal and a half per contest. Has been a career 37% 3-point shooter. That was massive for the team. Jarrell Colbert, who is a former top 100 recruit, was over at LSU, SMU. He should be able to give this team some nice rebounding as well. That said, I am going to be willing to lay it with Santa Clara. This is quite a bit of a body clock game here for McNeese, traveling from the great state of Texas, now having to play on the West Coast, and Herb Sendek just always knows how to be able to get these guards firing all cylinders, even though they do lose pretty much 4 of their top 6 scorers from a season ago. Elijah Mai, he looked really good a season ago, being able to supply the team with 11 points, 4 boards, shot over 40% from three-point range. He's really going to be one of the headline guys and one of the heads of the snake this season. They are right now dealing with a little bit of injury. Gary Nomad, who was a former top 150 recruit of Michigan State, along with a former top 150 recruit of Iowa, Chris Tejo. These were 2 guys that were missing from their opening night game, so that's something that you want to take note of. I don't think either guy gets out there on the floor, but you are going to have Brenton Napper. Napper last season, about 6 points per contest, a career 37% three-point shooter. I think that he's going to be able to do some nice things with this offense. And then you've got the ultimate rebounder, Jake Emsinger. He did not give you any scoring whatsoever last year, 3 points per game, but as a big man, he was able to do multiple assists per contest, and he was able to give you about 5.5 rebounds per game. He's going to be rock solid, even though he doesn't necessarily have a ton of size at 6'9". He's going to do a nice job down low, and I do think that the overall size of this team, you've also got Buki Obaye, who he was relatively glued to the bench a season ago, but he's actually a guy from the great state of Texas. I think that he's going to be able to take some strides forward as a little bit of a project big man, and don't sleep on Christian Hammond. Hammond last season, he was limited due to injury, but I mean, that said, he's a guy that 2 seasons ago was able to be a nice off-the-bench scorer that was able to give you like 4 or 5 points per contest, and I do think that his overall development is going to be large, and in the end, I do think that with Santa Clara being able to play this game out there on the West Coast, they find a way to be able to get it done. Semi-total 147.5. I do think that McNeese is still going to be playing their relatively defense-oriented style from a season ago, and we did see Santa Clara, albeit it was against a non-D1 team in Humboldt State, hold them to 53 points. I think that they're in a little bit of transition with losing some of those guys in the backcourt from a season ago with regards to their offense, so like the under and I'm willing to lay with Santa Clara, and that'll wrap things up for the Friday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways to be able to throw those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larzium, maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Justin Perri. He does such an incredible job over at Chocolate Bets. He joined me in segment number 2, and I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, picks and analysis on every game, every day. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.